Okay, hello everyone. This is my very first solo hosting hangout, and I'm honored and privileged to have His Gadliness himself, the Gadfather, His magnificence. We are here in the presence of Gad and witnesses. Um, Gad Saad, professor of marketing at Concordia University, and what I really find wonderful about him is that he takes a specific interest in evolutionary theory as applied to the psychology of consumption. And of course, that also branches, I think, for him into an interest in evolutionary or human behavioral biology um, in regards to all kinds of human behaviors and all kinds of societal norms and cultures and things like that. So I am really, I feel really lucky to have him on here. And I'm going to bask in his glow. And I'm going to ask him, because I want this to be sort of an organic conversation, but I should start off with a couple questions. What got you interested in the evolutionary theory behind things like consumption?
Right. First, thank you so much for having me. I first learned of you via one of my followers who said you have to check out this YouTube star. And so I Googled your name and I went and saw your interview with Cenk.
Oh.
And that was my first introduction to the great Karen. And then subsequently, I think we connected a few times on my YouTube channel. So it's great to be here. So let me address your first question. So in 1990, I was a first semester doctoral student at Cornell. And my supervisor had suggested that I take an advanced social psychology course, as one of my first semester courses. This wasn't an evolutionary psychology course. It was a social psychology course. But about halfway through the semester, the professor, his name is Dennis Regan, assigned a book called Homicide, written by two evolutionary psychologists housed in Canada, their husband-wife team, Martin Daly and Margot Wilson, where they looked at criminality from an evolutionary perspective. So they basically argued that there are certain patterns of criminality that transcend time or place. For example, if you have a stepfather or step-parent in the family, that increases by something like 100-fold the likelihood of there being child abuse. The most likely danger that a woman faces is not from a serial killer who's going to jump at her from the trees. It's going to be her long-term male partner. And the reason why he's going to go into a violent fit, if not kill her, is if he thinks that she cheated on him or has actually cheated on him because of reasons of paternity uncertainty. This is not something that men tolerate. And so I looked at that book, looked at the parsimony, the explanatory elegance of how it could explain things in so many different contexts, and I was bitten by the evolutionary bug. And so since I wanted to study consumer psychology, I quickly realized that nobody in consumer behavior was applying this biological lens, and that's how I founded the field. So that's how it started.
Oh, that's awesome. It always astounds me how we seem to like we're happy to study every other species from an evolutionary perspective, right? From a perspective of adaptation and behavior that's rooted in biology, not ourselves. And when it comes to like even just basic drives, like the drive to consume, the urge to glut yourself when it's a time of plenty because you never know when the next time of scarcity is going to be, right? And all of those things that actually drive a lot of consumerism, drive impulse buying. That when you even look at the amount of debt that people have now, that is debt on depreciable assets, cars and goods and furniture and even groceries. And they're carrying all of this debt. It's not land or houses that go up in value. It's they see what they want and they want it right now.
Right.
And they have the ability to do that now with credit. And if you don't actually look at the driving forces instinctively that drive some of that behavior, it's really difficult to get people to learn healthier, more effective and safer ways to conduct themselves. And so I don't understand, like, how on earth could this be a new field? I mean,
Right.
consumption is such a primary aspect of our being, what we want, when we want it.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, no, it's just it seems so much like it would lend itself, even almost more than just things like gender differences and stuff like that. Consumption would lend itself to those an examination through primary instinctive urges and impulses and things like that.
Well, so there you said a lot of things there, and we could spend quite a bit of time on each one. Let me start with the last thing you said. How could it be? How could biology and evolutionary theory not be part of the study of consumption?
Mm.
And I think here there are several factors. So let me try to sort of uncouple a few of these forces. So I'll start with the following. Most social scientists have, if you like, when they enter the membership club of social scientists, they sort of raise their hand and they state, I hereby attest to the fact that biology matters for all species other than humans.
Yes.
So, right? Humans are a cultural animal. What defines our humanity, according to those social scientists, is that we transcend our biology. So, and this is, by the way, there's a formal term for this. It's called the human reticence effect. The idea is that it's perfectly fine to explain, the behavior of the mosquito and the salamander and the hyena using evolutionary principles, but there's something distinct about us as a species. Now, if you are religious, you'll couch that in a religious cloak, right? There's a unique relationship between God and humans that is different from the rest of the animals. But you could be perfectly secular and an atheist, but you're a social scientist, and therefore you reject the idea that biology matters. Now, some will be perfectly happy to accept that evolution works on humans, but that it simply stops at the neck.
Yeah.
Right? So my opposable thumb, of course, that must be due to evolutionary mechanism. Why my pancreas have evolved to be of the particular form that they are in, that must be due to evolutionary theory. But my brain, that's due to socialization, that's due to culture, that's due to my rabbi, because we're born with blank slates, and it's socialization that makes sense. Now, why do they? I mean, obviously, these social scientists are not all a bunch of buffoons and idiots. So there must be a reason that can explain this otherwise profound buffoonery. And I think, as you might imagine, I've historically been quite popular with some of my social scientist colleagues. But as I always say, science is an autocorrective process. Truth is on my side, and they're all running to the Gadfather now saying, you are the master. But anyways,
Excellent.
but anyways, one of the reasons why social scientists, abdicated this idea of biology is because they saw that so many cretins misused evolutionary theory, right? So going back to the social class elitists of the British system, the social Darwinists, which of course has nothing to do with Darwin, they say, hey, there's a struggle between the classes, and we're the upper class, and if the lower classes lose out and die out and don't get access to education and don't get healthcare, hey, that's natural, that's Darwinian. Eugenicists came along and said, hey, there's a struggle between different groups. Some are smart, some are not, some are homosexual, some are heterosexual. Why don't we sterilize the folks who are undesirable so that they don't pollute the gene pool?
Yeah.
The Nazis came along and said, hey, there's a struggle between races. We're the Aryan race. Screw the gypsies, the Jews, and the homosexuals. Hey, that's Darwinian. Darwin said this. And so because of all these reasons, it became very, very difficult to accept that biology could simply be an explanatory framework without looking at its negative consequences. And so they built these new edifices where biology was completely erased from the theoretical purview of social scientists. And myself and others have been trying very hard over the past 20 years to say, yes, of course we're cultural animals. Of course socialization matters. Nobody denies that. Of course the environment matters. But to deny the fact that we're biological beings, as you said, it's going to lead to suboptimal explanations.
Well, what bothers me is that any way of looking at the problem can any framework that you use can be used to abuse others. You Darwinism or Darwinism or evolution, genetics, all of that. You can, if you have if you have a couple and they need to do in vitro fertilization and they choose a female to be implanted rather than a male, or they choose they have the embryos tested to weed out genetic disorders, or say they discover with their first child that they're both carriers and that their children now have a 50% chance or whatever to have cystic fibrosis or something like that, right? And then they choose not to have children. They're practicing eugenics, right? And we would call that, socially responsible behavior,
Right.
right? So it's just, like it's really, really difficult to parse the idea that only a biological understanding of human behavior or a biological framework to describe some aspects of human behavior could be subject to abuse. Um, you look at the vagaries of some of the social construct model, some of the injustices that have been done in the name of that model, in the name of proving it, in the name of demonstrating that yes, this is, you can raise a boy as a girl and he will be a girl.
Right.
And the amount of human suffering that can come out of that, with particularly with David Reimer, and I'm sure there are
Exactly.
others, right? Like it's all subject to abuse by people who want to abuse it.
Well, this is like saying, don't study physics, because physics could ultimately lead to mechanics, and mechanics can lead to the development of weaponry, and weaponry can result in nuclear physics, which could, right? So let's ban physics, because downstream there might be some misapplications of physics knowledge that could be detrimental to the whole planet. And I think, so that's why, in a sense, I'd like to give these guys, to be charitable with them, because I truly, genuinely believe that this lunacy started from a truly good place, right? They really were trying to do good in eradicating biology. And a classic example would be the cultural relativists. So Franz Boas was the guru of this. Are you familiar with him at all?
No,
No.
Probably, yeah, but not by name.
So Franz Boas was a cultural anthropologist I think at Columbia, who developed the idea that you can't really study cultures other than within their idiosyncratic realities, right? Cultures are relative. There is no such thing as a human universal, because then that would imply that there is something as a non-malleable human nature. Everything is situational. Everything is culture specific. And then he spawned, if you like, a whole movement. So perhaps you might know this student. I think she was a student of his, Margaret Mead. Right?
Oh, yes. Okay.
There you go. Now we're getting somewhere.
Yeah, now we're talking. Now
Right.
Yes.
So Margaret Mead, for your viewers who may not know, was desperate to identify some sexual context where the roles would be reversed, right? Men would be
any society where she could show that it was reversed. Yeah.
Right. So I think it was maybe in Samoa, right? Where the men go into a fetal position, say, no, I don't want sex, I'm afraid of sex, and women are desirous and are sort of the aggressive ones when it comes to soliciting sex. And of course, it was all hogwash. Part of it was they were hoaxing her, and part of it was wishful thinking on her part, if not more sinister, perhaps doctoring the stuff. And there's actually a famous book called The Fateful Hoaxing of Margaret Mead, where you see what kind of garbage gibberish this whole thing was. But she was so desperate to not have any context where there was such a thing as a human universal. I'll give you another example that's not sex related. Even the 6 basal emotions that are captured in our faces, which are known as human universals. So for example, me frowning, or me smiling, or me showing disgust, or me being surprised, those are all innate responses. You can't go to the Yanomamo tribe in the Amazon and go like this, and they misunderstand that to mean you're happy.
Yeah, no.
But of course, somebody tried to argue, no, it's culture specific, it varies, blah, blah, blah. And again, it's because the idea that there is such a thing as instincts, as innate tendencies, as biological blueprints is just unacceptable. Now, the reality is that it's becoming increasingly untenable to spew this buffoonery proudly. And so the guys that used to come at me with a lot of hostility, if they come at me now, they do so a lot more politely because they're a lot less self-assured in their stupidity. So some of them still exist, but they're a lot less confident.
Well,
So we'll see.
I think too. There's this idea that if there is a human nature, and if some things are fixed, right? If some things are that exist at birth, and there's only so much flexibility there in terms of outcomes based on what you are when you're born, or shortly thereafter. I think that there's just this idea that if that is the case, then none of it can be fixed.
Right.
And I would agree with that. None of these inequalities are ever going to go away. I mean, like, they're never going to fully go away. You're never going to have that sort of perfect utopia that so many of these people, in the activist branch of academia, women's studies, gender studies, interdisciplinary studies, and all of these things, right, which are more indoctrination and activating people politically,
right.
than educating them. You're never going to be able to. They would have to accept that their utopia is unattainable.
Right.
And I think that that's actually a healthy view to have, because whenever humans seem to believe that there is a utopia that's attainable, we end up doing really, really horrible things,
right,
to get ourselves there. And we never do get ourselves there. We just, kill 20 million people, right? And then after we kill off all those kulaks, then all their neighbors starved, because it was only the fact that the kulaks were like slightly more successful at farming that was keeping their neighbors alive.
Right.
So it's really frustrating. There out of all of the options, and all of their potential consequences, it always struck me that that accuracy, like being accurate and observing things objectively and trying to figure out how they actually work, even if the implications are scary, that's the best way to go.
Right.
So,
I agree. I think there's a nice analogy to be made here between the belief system of, the biology deniers and religious folks, and that they're both looking for an infinite well of hope, right? If I'm facing the idea of mortality, right, I have existential angst. I don't like the idea that the party's going to one day end. Here I am having a great conversation with Karen, and what do you mean? Like in another 40 years, it's all over? Wait a second. So there is a solution. I could swallow this religious pill, and the party will go on forever. Sign me up, right?
yeah.
And so in the same way that religion allows me to have a path to hope, to immortality, the same thing happens with those guys that are peddling the hope of we can all be whatever we want to be. Had the little Johnny been cuddled differently, then he too could have been Michael Jordan. That's a really hopeful message. But of course, it's a message based on complete faith, and that flies against every possible, shred of evidence that could exist in the real world. So it is a form of religious thinking, except that it doesn't have a deity, but it's the suspension of reason in both cases.
Well, what bothers me too about that, if only little Jimmy had been cuddled differently and had more bedtime stories read to him, he could have been another Michael Jordan, right? Is the idea that, okay, if we just get everybody education, that's the solution for everybody, right? So if we put every kid through law school, we're going to need that many lawyers, and nobody's going to need a dishwasher. Right?
Exactly.
That this is somehow this magical panacea that's just going to fix everything, and everybody's going to be equally successful. Well, the entire concept of success is a relative concept.
Right.
Right? You're successful compared to the success of others. And so what's so special about being a Michael Jordan if everybody could be one?
Right. True. Very true. Speaking of which, this kind of relative comparison thing, I have a great study for you that we did a few years ago that speaks to this point about the fact that, our calculus of defining our happiness is not so much in terms of necessarily the absolute of whatever it is that we have, but in terms of how much the bastard next door has. which is like keeping up with the Joneses in a sense, right?
Yeah.
So I did a
And the
study.
whole basis of income inequality being such a major issue now, even though people are wealthier, they're better off essentially than they have been ever in
Ever,
history.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So basically, we brought in people, and this is with one of my former doctoral students, Tripat Gill, and we gave people two scenarios. So if I said to you, let's say you, Karen, had come into the lab, I say, look, we could give you a $500 increase for your salary, your income at your company, and your close colleague, whomever that may be, can also receive $500. So you both receive 500, or you could receive $600 and your colleague could receive $800. Now,
Oh yeah.
you like that, huh? So from a strict, rational choice theory perspective, from a strict Homo economicus perspective, utility maximization, or in this case, income maximization, 600 is better than 500. So every sane person should prefer to have 600 in their pockets than 500. Now, of course, what shocked economists, it disturbed them so badly, is that people actually don't only care about maximizing their income. They actually have a disutility of having an unfair outcome, right? And so, and here, maybe later when we get into sex differences, this might come up again. What was interesting is that women in particular were much more keen on the 500, 500 rather than the 600, 800. Men much less so. In other words, men were somewhat happier to have the 600, but for women, the equitable split was really driving their behavior. So yes, relative status matters.
Oh yeah, no, and I think didn't they do some study on like 3-year-olds or something where they essentially told the 3-year-old, okay, you can have 2 cookies, and everybody else will get 2 cookies.
Right.
Or you will get 1 cookie and everyone else will get none. And most of the kids chose to have 1 cookie and screw everyone else.
Right.
And,
and incidentally, that strategy, so when you were trying to establish that something is innate, there are multiple lines of evidence you could use. So one is you could take very young children that would have otherwise been too young to be socialized. And never mind 2-year-olds, you could take kids that are 6 months old and, for example, show them different toys and look at which one they gaze at longer, right? And the idea is that there's no way that they could have been socialized at that point. They don't yet have the cognitive development to be socialized. So one strategy is to do exactly what you said, which is to go with very young children and demonstrate that the behavior or preference already exists. Another way to do that, and there are several other ones, is to do a comparative psychology approach where you go cross species. And so if you want to study some of these decision-making biases, then you take rhesus monkeys or macaques and so on, and then you see that, with our animal cousins, close animal cousins, they exhibit the same decision-making biases. So there are and this, by the way, speaks to this idea, which upsets me very much when people say, oh, evolutionary psychologists just come up with these just so
stories,
right? when somebody says that, I literally take those words to say, this is now the person who just said that, I hereby declare that I am an idiot that has absolutely no understanding of evolutionary psychology. It is exactly tantamount to saying that, because evolutionary psychology is actually the exact opposite of that attack. Usually evolutionary psychologists are profoundly more thorough in the amount of evidentiary, threshold that they like to reach before they claim that something is an adaptation. Yes, there is such a thing as pop evolutionary psychology, right? Where you try to come up with all sorts of adaptive stories for everything, but that's not what real, serious, hardworking evolutionary psychologists do. And so there you go. Just so story, it's a bunch of baloney.
well, I agree. I agree that the whole, and even if you can explain the logic, and I've done this a couple times, right? In my videos, I've sort of made a conjecture, explained my reasoning, explained why I think that this might be what's going on, and saying I really hope somebody out there who is in a position to research this or look into it, try and test the hypothesis, will do that, right? But I present it as a conjecture, as just this is just me going from this and this and this piece of research I've read and trying to figure out maybe what's going on here. And what seems to be with the social constructionists or constructivists or whatever you want to call them is they absolutely they will make like just really broad statements as if they are absolute fact, as
Right.
if they've been tested highly rigorously. The latest one was that huge study that they did that was they kind of did a big long article in the Washington Post on it.
Okay.
That 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 college women, blah blah
Are
blah,
raped
right?
or assaulted.
Yeah, and the response rate in that survey was 19 point something percent. So they sent out questionnaires to, out of every 100 people, they sent the questionnaire to, only 19 people responded, right? Do you think maybe that those 19 people who feel interested enough to answer like 45 minutes worth of questions about rape might
Right.
have a specific interest in the topic?
Right.
Like, for some reason, maybe just, oh,
And even the methodology, if I mean, I didn't read the original study, but as I understand it, what was construed as an assault was profoundly broad, right? So if I
yes.
said, hey girl, how about you come and get ride on the Gadfather magic carpet, well, that would be verbal rape, right?
I
And
thought you
so
were going to say Gadfather magic wand.
well, I don't know you well enough to say that, and my wife might be somewhere in the neighborhood.
Oh well, I have a propensity to swear and just like be really crude at
Well,
times. So
thank you for having restrained that. Although I used to be a competitive soccer player, so I've hung around the rough crowd. So
there
feel
you
free
go.
if you have to. Uh, so, but isn't that true that the way that they
Yeah,
defined assault
they
was very broad?
they did, and one of the things that was sort of buried in some table midway or three-quarters of the way through was some data that actually actively disproved what that the accuracy of their survey and the applicability of it to like the broader college population was because if you took the 2.2% of women who responded who said that they had been sexually assaulted and had reported it to the university, and then you go and compare that against the number of female students in university and the number of reports to universities of sexual assaults and sexual misconduct nationwide, you find that there's something like 150 times more reports projected from this survey than
Wow.
actually exist and have been reported to the universities, right?
Right.
So, and it blows my mind that there was another one that was done fairly recently. It was 1 in 3 college men would rape if they believed that there would be no consequences and they could get away with it. No one would know.
Oh, right. I think I heard about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it took a blogger, some random small internet vlogger from Brazil, I think, to essentially email. He read the whole study and then he emailed the researcher to ask follow-up questions about what the instrument was and what the methodology was, and the instrument that was used was they used a modified Malamuth scale. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, where 1 is not at all and 5 is very likely, they used a scale of 0 to 100, where 0 was not at all and 100 was very likely. And anyone who answered more than 10, more than 10 to the question, to the suggestion, if I knew that I could get away with it and there would be no
Was classified
consequences,
as a
right?
yes.
Not just that, I would force a female to do something she didn't want to do. Okay. Anyone who answered greater than 10 on that was not just seen as, potentially, possibly, but was described by the study as having intent to commit that act. And not the act that they were saying yes to, force a woman to do something she didn't want to do, but force a woman to have sexual intercourse against her will.
Wow.
So, like, forcing intercourse was not part of the question that they were answering, but any answer greater than a 10. So anyone who wasn't a not at all
Right.
was considered to have intention to commit rape.
Wow.
And she came right out and said this in her email exchange with this guy that he read, on a video. And she essentially said anyone who didn't say not at all to this one question that wasn't even about rape was included in the intentions group, right?
Extraordinary.
Having intent to rape.
Wow. Have you heard of I'm trying to go on memory here. Is it Laura Kipnis? Does that ring a bell? Does that case?
It does ring a bell, but you'd have
I
to.
Yeah, so I discussed this case. Maybe I'm getting her name wrong. She's a professor. I think she's at Northwestern. Again, maybe the details are escaping me, but I discussed it on Joe Rogan recently. And so she's a professor who's otherwise, very liberal, probably with strong feminist, tendencies. But she wrote an article where she was questioning the whole hysteria about the sort of
Oh, yes.
you've heard about that, yeah. So the sexual assault narrative, right? Like basically every second woman is getting put down on the floor and gang raped, right?
Yeah.
And so by her questioning that, by writing an article, and she's a professor. Oh, you froze. Oh, you're okay now. Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. She was creating an unsafe environment for the female students who are attending that university. But now, if it just ended there, then you would just say, okay, it's just some social justice warrior gibberish. Who cares? But then what they did is, I think one or two of the students filed a complaint under, I think, Title IX, yeah, which basically says that women should have equal access to education and so on. And by her writing an article criticizing the hysteria about the sexual assault thing, where she's questioning the methodology, perhaps, of a published study, that was creating an unsafe space. Hence, they couldn't have access to education because they felt unsafe. And if you read what she was put through, I mean, it seems as though it's just make believe. It's a Gulag story from Soviet Union. It's an
Like
Orwellian.
Kafka. Yeah.
It's Kafka, exactly. And so I got so angry when I read that I got on Twitter, started going wild. I dropped everything that day and started rallying the forces. I contacted Joe Rogan, and just by him retweeting it, it basically goes to 10 gazillion people. And basically my point was, and then I wrote to the aggrieved professor to say, look, not all of us are a bunch of wackos in academia. Here's a person, myself, who's actually coming to your defense, even though it could put me in jeopardy with some of my own crowd. And so it just struck me as unbelievable. Here's a feminist. Here's a woman who's probably very much, inculcated with all the pseudo-liberal, bullshit, and yet she became a victim of the endless nonsense. It's bewildering.
Oh, it's really interesting because if you actually look at Stanford University Encyclopedia of Philosophy, they have they have sort of a very good entry on something that is described as feminist ethics. And feminist ethics prioritizes, it sees traditional ethics as over prioritizing male virtues, of universality and impartiality and being conscious of rules and rights. And it unjustly de-emphasizes things like emotion and partiality and non-universality and all of these.
Sorry, I know we should speak at the same time. Alternate ways of knowing.
Yes, women's ways of knowing, different ways of knowing. Eve Ensler knows in her vagina, if you wanted to know that. Apparently, because that's what she says. Deep in my heart, in my soul, in my vagina, I know. But yeah, it's so essentially what they seem to be doing is even looking at the UN just recently, they have a cyber violence task force thing with UN Women, cyber violence against women and girls, and some of the people that they brought onto that panel, one of them, she used to be a sort of a denizen of an internet forum that was devoted to doxing people and DDoSing them and harassing them and just absolutely bullying. She her name's Zoe Quinn, and she almost completely destroyed a rival feminist charity that was competing for donations, against her own, just through assembling a Twitter mob and they got
Wow.
DDoSed and their website crashed, and they almost like fizzled into obscurity over that. So I mean, these some of these people who are sort of proponents to end cyberbullying and proponents to end harassment online and trolling and all of this stuff, they're like the worst offenders, but they wouldn't see themselves that way. They would see themselves as, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter, right?
There you go.
And they're definitely looking at them. I've even heard them say there are no wrong tactics, only wrong targets.
Nice, beautiful. Are you familiar, since you mentioned feminist, did you say feminist ethics or feminist morality or both?
Feminist ethics. So,
right. Are you familiar with feminist mathematics?
Oh, the whole E equals MC
Oh,
squared.
yeah, there's that one. No,
Sext equation. It privileges the speed of light and the penis, apparently.
very good. There's that one. But it even goes more basal than that. So there's a book I highly recommend to all your viewers and to yourself if you haven't read it. It's called Higher Superstition. Have you read that book?
No.
It's by Gross and Levitt. One, I think, is a mathematician. The other is a biologist by training. And they were so upset with all the, the postmodernists and women's studies and all those gibberish movements in the university, right? I mean, they're real academics that they wrote this book called Higher Superstition, where they singularly sort of went after every single one of these movements. And at one point, they get into feminist mathematics. So here's what feminist mathematics is. So let's suppose you're giving a word problem to children so that they learn, how to solve for an unknown variable. So if you say Joe is a fireman and he makes $22 an hour, now he's going to get a 12% increase. How much will Joe make now? Well, see, that already is Joe. It's fireman. So what you need to do instead is say Linda, who is a firewoman married to Betsy, because then already you're introducing, different definitions of families. She makes $22 an hour, and she now gets 12%. So by introducing, a panoply of new word problems, that's feminist mathematics. Yeah, but it doesn't change the fact that $22 when it increases by 12% is still the same, right? But apparently that's an alternate way that kind of expands the discussion into a more pluralistic perspective. It's nuts.
I don't want that religion preached to me during math class, and I really don't want it preached to my children during math class. I mean, it's bad enough that they have to endure social studies, and pretty much everybody that I've talked to that is a little bit defiant in face of authority, doesn't really like to put up with bullshit, can spot inconsistencies, is a free thinker and a critical thinker, and can sort of and they know when they're being fed a line of shit.
Right.
They fail social studies in high school. They do really poorly.
Right.
And it's because that field, even into high school and junior high, is so bogged down in a political viewpoint that doesn't seem to really conform with reality. So I don't know how we're gonna fix that.
Well, here's one way. I've got one. You ready?
Yes.
So if you look at the political affiliation of professors, so this is going beyond the high school example that you gave or elementary school, but let's look at once you get the students at the university level. Well, if you study, and I mentioned this on a recent appearance, I can't remember which one. If you look at what percentage of the professors are either part of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party at American universities, it's just bewildering. It's breathtaking. Yeah. Now, of course, it's much worse the more you get into the bullshit fields. So,
the humanities and
right, exactly. So if you're in sociology, I think the ratio is 44-1. Okay, if you are, as you go into like business and engineering, and then it becomes a lot more equal. But as you said, some of the social sciences, the humanities, women's studies,
journalism,
communications. It's just now people would write to me and say, "Well, no kidding. I mean, professors are smart, they're intelligent. So of course they're going to affiliate with the party of reason, because all those other Republicans are a bunch of hick evolution denying folks. To which I respond, listen, I'm an evolutionist. So obviously when it comes on the issue of evolution, I'll readily admit that, you know, the Republican senator is more likely to be an evolution denier than the Democrat. On the other hand, not every issue that you discuss in university is a clear scientific fact. What should be the fiscal policy? Are we for or against death penalty? Should we be interventionists when it comes to foreign policy? These are not clear yes, no answers. There's scientific truths. So by inculcating all the students from a very young age with one political narrative, you ensure that everybody then becomes sheep. And I see it on my Facebook page. So if I look at all my academic colleagues, who are all, you know, very sophisticated, very smart, very educated, very accomplished, it's extraordinary how little variance there is in their political positions. I mean, clearly that can't be right. Right? You can't agree. I mean, right? Barack Obama can't be the second coming of the Messiah. Somebody has to detest the guy. And you can be an academic and think that he's not a good guy. But no, now on the other hand, I've got friends on Facebook who are not academics, and they will be perfectly the opposite, right? Barack Obama is the manifestation of Satan, and you know he works for some diabolical agent. So it shows you what happens when you suspend your capacity to engage in nuanced thinking. And regrettably, academics are not necessarily inoculated from this possibility.
Well, of course they're not. And when you actually come right down to it, when they've done sort of some research on it, they've found that the more education somebody has, the more likely they are to live in a political echo chamber. And the people with the least education have the broadest range of conversation partners. So it just essentially means that, you know, when you can surround yourself with people who just believe the same as you, and then you start to anything like that, any sphere that becomes sort of politically just uniform, right? Then you will have all motion, political, you know, deviance in that is accepted to be in the more radical direction, right? So it gets more radical over time. It just kind of inches its way over to the end. Everybody kind of shifts a little bit, you know, over the next 10 years. And now we're here now, right? And we're this much farther away from the center and from being able to have a meaningful dialogue with the other side.
Right.
So
it's sorry, go ahead. Did you finish?
No, go ahead.
Have you heard since we're talking about postmodernism now, for some of the viewers, they might have seen me talk about this somewhere else, but others may not. It's worth the price of admission. Have you ever heard about my story with my encounter with the infamous postmodernist? Do you know that story at all? No, does that ring a bell? No,
I haven't. I watched your decoder video, but which I thought was wonderful.
Have you watched the most recent one?
Your most recent...
today.
No, I haven't.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know, this is on my YouTube channel. I had a Aslan Uyghur decoder 5000, where you enter anything into it and it spews the correct interpretation. So if you say Armenian genocide, it will say dirty Jew, right? And so I took this decoder, and I'll come back to the postmodernist story in a second. Today, I just released a video where I applied the decoder to the FBI most wanted terrorist list. And the beauty of the decoder, it turns out, is that not only could you enter, let's say, a name or a set of words, and it could decode it for you, it also works pictorially. So if you enter the photo of the terrorist that's on the list, it could actually produce for you the true photo. And so I entered the list of all the 31, and it turns out that the decoder came out with names like Moshe Silberstein, Israel Levy, and so you should watch it. It's really, really worth it.
Was Ezra Levant on there?
No, he wasn't on it, but I think he should be. Maybe he's number 16 on the list. I only gave the first 15.
So. I think so, because he's apparently the devil. So
you said Ezra Levant, right?
Ezra Levant, yeah, is apparently the devil. He's like just an evil person. And my mother is like, I'm considering disowning her for liking him. So
Are you in your house in Canada?
yeah,
Where are you? Oh,
I'm in Edmonton.
oh, you're in. Okay, so for the viewers who may not know, do you want to mention who he
Yeah,
is?
no,
Just,
Ezra Levant is a journalist who he used to own and edit a magazine. He got in trouble with the Human Rights Council in Canada here over republishing cartoons of Mohammed way back then. And when he went in, and this is why I love this guy, has like a gigantic set of like hairy gamey balls on him, right? Because he's sitting in the pre-hearing where the sort of the deposition with and he's uploaded all of this to YouTube,
yeah,
with the woman from the Human Rights Council who's going to decide whether this is going to go to a hearing, right? And she says, well, what was your intent in publishing those cartoons? And what does that matter? What does that matter? You know what
incredible.
I want you to do? I want you to pretend that my intent was the worst intent ever. I want you to pretend that I had nothing but malicious intent, that my intentions were like I wanted nothing but evil to come out of my publishing of those cartoons. Doesn't matter. I still had every right to publish them.
Right. It was incredible. A true. Yeah, I mean, if everybody had, as you said, that testicular fortitude, the West would be in a very different place right now.
Mm-hmm.
But going back to the postmodernists, so this actually is the doctoral student that I mentioned earlier. We were going out to celebrate. I think maybe he was defending his dissertation, and it was my wife and I, him, and he had brought a date along for the celebratory dinner, and he had warned me that the date in question was a postmodernist, feminist, cultural anthropology graduate student, or something like that. And so, please, if you could be on your best behavior. I said, oh, absolutely, I'm going to be on my best behavior. You could count on it. Scott's on it. No, but I truly, genuinely,
you had the best of intentions.
I had the best of intentions in mind. And so we started having a nice evening. And at one point, somehow the conversation said, oh, I hear that you are a postmodernist. Yes, I am. Do you mind if I take a crack at hitting you with some human universals? Because for your viewers who don't know, postmodernist starts with the premise that there are no universals other than the one universal, that there are no universals, right? And so I said, I'm going to hit you with what I think is a universal, and then you could tell me where I've gone wrong. She goes, okay, shoot. I said, is it true that within the human species, it is only women that bear children? Surely that's a universal. I'm pretty sure that's one. So she scoffed. She rolls her eyes. She looks at me with disdain and disgust and says, absolutely not. So really, how's that? Because, well, there is a tribe off some Japanese island, whatever, somewhere, where in the spiritual realm of their spiritual narrative, it is the men who bear children. So by you restricting the definition of childbearing to the material biological realm, that's how you keep women barefoot and pregnant. So once I recovered from that departure from sanity, I said, okay, maybe it's too contentious to discuss childbearing. So let's take a less contentious issue. How about this? Is it true that sailors, since time immemorial, have relied on the following universal fact, that within the context of Earth, the sun rises in the east and it sets in the west? Could they rely on that? Is that true? Is that a universal? And so you know what she used there? Let's see if you're well trained in your postmodernist thinking. How did she show me that?
I maybe some cultures, north is the bottom and south is the top on the map. I don't know.
No, boo! You didn't study your Lacan, your Derrida, your Foucault. You don't know your stuff. So here she uses Derrida's deconstructionism, which basically argues that don't use labels have no meaning. So she said that which you call east and you call west, I could call something else. But now here's the interesting part, and I bet you some of my viewers already know what I'm going to say next, or your viewers rather. She said, what do you mean by sun? That which you call sun, I might call dancing hyena. To which I responded, fair enough. for example, when I go to the beach and I let my fat stomach rest there with the dancing hyena will cause a dancing hyena burn on my stomach. So, so I will not play those label games. I don't want to play this game. So that was the end of it. So I've often used this example precisely because, right, this wasn't, you know, a heroin addict school dropout, right? This was somebody who was going to go on in academia and infect the next generation of students with this lunacy, right? So these movements are not just idiotic, it's that they literally parasitize brains that could otherwise be
put to good
productive.
use. Yeah. Like, I just, you know, when it comes to, like, and I was just actually discussing this yesterday on a live stream with my partner, radio partner Allison. When it comes to the gymnastics, the mental gymnastics, they have to. There's no lack of intellectual talent there. Um, if you have to, you know, sort of engage in this like complete pretzelizing of reality and twist everything and turn and come up with some like wonky reasoning that, like, it's the opposite of Occam's razor, right? Um, in order to demonstrate that, you know, when a man gets falsely accused of rape and then, you know, a crowd of people lynches him and he gets beaten to death, that's actually misogyny, that the cause of that is misogyny. You know, and they can do it. They can come up with this bizarre line of reasoning as to why that incident occurred because of misogyny. So there's no lack of talent there. I just really wish that they would use their brains for something better, like something not so icky.
My feeling is, and you'll tell me what you think, my feeling is that it's really on its last legs. Now, some people have written to me and said, no, what are you talking about? I'm in university and I still hear all this gibberish. But I really believe that, you know, 20 years ago was really the zenith of this movement. Now, it takes a while for these movements to completely disappear from, you know, the DNA of the walls of an institution. So it's not as though from one day to the next, we're not going to have one manifestation of postmodernist nonsense in a classroom. But as a general rule, my feeling is that it's seen its zenith and now it's on its way out. It might take another 20 years, but they're out. What's your feel? Do you agree with that, or do you think that they're still strong as ever?
I don't. I think that they are seeing. Like, it seems like the more that they realize that they have no case to make, the more they seem to choose really, really trivial things like man spreading and Matt Taylor's shirt and and that thing that Dr. Tim Hunt said, you know,
Yes.
about women in labs. You know, they take those teeny tiny insignificant incidents or things and they blow them up and they become more hysterical about those things and more upset about those things, those insignificances, than I think even suffragettes were about the vote.
Right.
Right. And so you essentially you have this sort of grasping. It does seem to be like sort of the death throes,
Right.
the last dying screams of a movement. But it you even if every single feminist, every single postmodernist, every single like woo woo, I'm atheist, but I have a religion, you know, and I'm very devout. It's just a political one or one about gender. That it's SJWism. Um, there's not just the people,
Right.
right? There's now policies and laws and mechanisms and changes of procedure. And I mean, if you actually look at rape law and how cases of rape, how they go down, how they proceed, they look completely different from any other serious felony. The rules are completely different. The what's permissible as far as evidence, what's permissible as far as cross examination. Um, some of the things I've read about cases where a woman's perjury was allowed to stand unchallenged because her lie, if you revealed her lie, it would reveal something about her sexual history. And the really awful thing about that is the only piece of physical evidence in that case was a pubic hair found on her cervix that came from a black man. And she was a young white woman in an era where interracial dating and shacking up were not really things. And she had lied and said that at the time of the rape, she was living at home with her mother and she was not sexually active, when in reality at the time of the rape she was living in sin with her black boyfriend. So there was a completely logical alternate explanation as to how a pubic hair from a black man found its way onto her cervix. But her perjury was allowed to stand because the judge ruled that the revelation of her cohabitation relationship with a
Wow.
black man would embarrass her, it would shame her, and that the jury didn't have any reason to hear that evidence, right?
Incredible. And of
So I
course,
mean, like, it's just absolutely, it's like some of these laws are brought in and these changes are brought in like with all the good intentions in the world, but then they're subject to scope creep and broader interpretation, and case law just moves everything further and further away from the original intent, and then you end up with cases like that.
I wrote an article where I looked at what happens when a woman provides false testimony to, falsely accuses a man of rape, and then 11 years later finally has a bout of guilt that says, hey, I was wrong. And I'm amazed at how minimal, if at all, the penalties are. And so I wrote an article saying that, look, I mean, it just can't make sense in terms of, I mean, you don't have to be a sort of an expert in morality or ethics or the judicial system to say that there's something fundamentally wrong where somebody could accuse someone else of a crime. They go to prison for 11 years. And then if you recant on your story and say, you know what, yeah, I lied. I'm really, really sorry. I feel so bad. I found Jesus now. Nothing can happen to you. And my thinking is that at the very least, maybe this is too Old Testament, eye for an eye, but you should serve as many years as he served in prison for what you just did, But I heard most people were in agreement with me, but a few wrote back and were quite upset that I would argue that a woman should be punished for providing false testimony.
I would say like, because and my objection to the she should serve the same sentence, that is not anything to do with what she deserves. It's to do with, well, if you found Jesus and you were like, yeah, no, I feel really bad about what I did, but if I were to recant and get that guy out of prison, I'm going to go to prison for 11 years. Maybe I'm not going to do that.
Right.
Right. And so essentially, you kind of have to balance this, make it not so punitive that women who have made false allegations will not recant. But absolutely, it just blows my mind that something that, I mean, like, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, right? Those would be of the 10 commandments, right? Those would be the ones that I would say, those are worth keeping around, right? And I hate to be a pick and chooser as far as religion goes, but I think that those are sort of universal in most religions. You don't kill people for no reason, without a good reason. You don't,
except if they're non-believers. Then you can kill them.
Well, I guess that's a good reason in some people's minds. And you don't lie. You don't lie about other people.
Yes.
And when you think about how many crimes, like even in the era of Blackstone, right? In the UK, there were like dozens of capital crimes. There were dozens of crimes that they would execute you for, right? Bearing false witness, and you look at the reaction even from the level of violence that would be brought to bear in honor cultures against people who had violated some kind of code of conduct. When the Atheism Plus thing went down, and I don't know if you know anything about that, but essentially,
is that the Rebecca Watson,
yes,
Admire stuff?
yes,
oh yeah.
And when all of that went down, and there were all of these women, and most of them emotionally unstable,
right,
women, who were flinging around just accusations that there's just rampant sexual harassment and sexual victimization going on at these atheist conferences, and okay, nobody's reporting it, but it's there, and women who say they've never had a problem, well, they just can't see the sexism there. They just haven't been trained to look for it properly, and or they have internalized misogyny, and they just want to be a chill girl and be popular with the guys, right, by dissing other women.
Right.
And not supporting the sisterhood, and all of these sexual allegations that started going around, and anonymous allegations made about Michael Shermer by P.Z. Myers, you know, a secondhand anonymous allegation that he published on his blog, and allegations about Lawrence Krauss and Bill Nye and all kinds of other people who, you know, even if they might not be criminal, they were definitely creepy and harassy, right? And I'm thinking to myself, you know, if all of this shit had gone down 4,000 years ago, the pile of dead male bodies that would have been left in the wake of all of that,
incredible,
over those women's allegations of sexual misconduct and sexual abuse and sexual exploitation. I mean, it beggars belief.
Well,
how severe that would have been taken, and we have no concept of what the consequences of a woman bearing false witness against a man could have been. And when you look at certain things in the law, in sort of Orthodox Judaism, the segregation of the sexes, even when a woman is allowed to be a professional, you know, there's still that segregation. Maybe that's there for a reason.
Right.
You know,
can I go back to Myers for a second?
Yeah, go ahead. I love to hear about him.
You know, I try to be as polite and restrained as I can, even when speaking of people with whom I might have strong disagreements. But that guy is so profoundly vile.
Oh, he's just so smarmy.
So I could say right here in front of whomever is watching that I detest this grotesque creature. You know, I've interacted a few times with him on Twitter, where I challenged him about his antipathy towards evolutionary psychology, and apparently he blocked me. Not that I was following him, but I just was tagging him, and he just blocked me because I was trying to actually see if we could have a conversation. Because in his case, what he goes around doing, I mean, yeah, we could talk about the Atheist Plus stuff, but even in a scientific context, he's one of those guys who has a profoundly large audience, right? I mean, as a scientist, and I'm going to try to be as polite as I can, he's not on the fast track for the Nobel Prize, right? I mean, he's not booking his flight to Stockholm, right?
He had one publication in Nature, and it was an opinion piece.
Right. So he certainly can't walk around as though, you know, he's Newton and Einstein.
Yeah, he's the talk of the walk or something. No.
Exactly. But on the other hand, of course, we have to give him credit for having built a extraordinarily large platform. And so my anger with him is that he's got this army of sycophants that basically are, you know, those little kids who kind of have the big bully at school, and they kind of hang around him, and whatever he says is the gospel. And so when he says that evolutionary psychology is a bunch of nonsense, and I mean, he's unbelievably unsophisticated in his positions when it comes to evolutionary psychology. I mean, he's literally just demonstrated he's a buffoon. So I tried to challenge him, and he just blocked me. And so I thought, you know, what kind of scientist? I mean, just think about, right? I mean, most of us have a commitment to the pursuit of truth. And so most of us, I'd like to think, are certainly open to having a dialogue. And sometimes I might be proven wrong, in which case I will humbly say, you know what, I was wrong on this, and I think you're right. And other times I might convince you. But in his case, you see what a dirty guy he is, because he's absolutely unwilling to engage you. And in my case, I think I had sent a couple of tweets. Sometimes I go on these Gad rants where I just tweet, you know, 8 times in a row to somebody just to hit him hard.
Well, you're only allowed 140 characters. How can you say anything coherent or useful or productive in 140 characters? You need a few tweets.
Exactly. So I said basically, if you take a evolutionary principle, X, and you use that evolutionary principle using a very clear epistemology to explain the mating behavior of the salamander, Myers would be perfectly happy with that. If you take the exact same evolutionary principle, using the exact same epistemology, and now apply it to the study of human mating, right? So nothing's changed in the methodology or the epistemology or the theory, but you apply it to, well, that's just a bunch of bullshit, racist, evolutionary psychologists who are weaving. I mean, these guys are not real scientists. And so I posted that. I said, you know, engage me. He blocks me. So to me, he's a charlatan. He's an ugly guy. And it's a real shame that he's got 100 million followers or whatever the number is. And I really detest him because he's really doing a disservice to a lot of people.
He also, I mean, like I was watching a live stream, and I don't know whether it's available anymore. I do know that I think Thunderfoot maybe had used it in one of his videos. But I was watching a live stream of Peasy Myers and Rebecca Watson and Jen McCrite, and they were talking about harassment of women, and he was sort of presiding over it like this sort of paternalistic, grandfatherly figure. These are his bitches.
Right.
These are they're his sister wives or whatever. I don't know how he thinks of them, but that just seemed to be what was coming across in his demeanor, was that these, oh, my daughters, my lovies, right? And they were comparing experiences, and the wording that they chose was different, but everything that I heard was, oh my God, I am just so hot. I can't even leave the house without getting catcalled. Oh, you too? I am so attractive. I can't even go out in my house coat and pick up my paper off the porch without some man hollering how like I'm hot stuff. And, you know, and it just came across as like the most unbelievably blatant exercise in humble bragging, right? Like, I'm so attractive that I have this problem, right? and you're looking at these two women who are average at best, and I'm not talking myself up. I mean, like, look at me. Like, what do I care about my appearance and my sexual appeal? Like, I don't even wear makeup when I go on video in front of 100,000 people. Right? So like I don't care. It's not part of who I am to care about that. But when you look at these women who are constantly complaining about, you know, they're average looking, and they're constantly complaining about being harassed sexually by men and hit on and stuff like that, and I'm thinking, is this like, are you hearing voices? Is that what this is? Like, you're looking at that nerd who's like, he's got his Nook, he's sitting on the bus, he's got his Nook open, and he's reading, like, I don't know, Thomas Sowell or like freaking Milton Friedman or whatever, right? He's reading some libertarian literature that Asperger's people tend to like, and he's just, and then he's just pausing to think about it, and he just lifts his head and he stares off into the middle distance that happens to be somewhere near you, and you're instantly thinking, oh my God, he wants to rape me.
Verbal rape. Visual rape.
Yes. Oh my God, he's not even looking at you. He's thinking and he's staring into space, and you're like, oh my God, his eyes are like, oh, they're penny. I can sense his intentions. I mean, like, and he's just, it's like a combination between, like, again, it's a megalomania. Right. It's a delusion of persecution and an erotomania all rolled into one.
There's a similar manifestation of this, and I put out a tweet on this recently, and I always, you know, I know the psychology of the social justice warriors, so I always flip it on them. So, for example, if I'm going to say something that's going to be perceived as fat shaming, then I remind them that I'm overweight, and I score very low on privilege, and then usually they leave me alone. So it turns out, you see, that and I've actually seen interviews with overweight women where they take this position very openly. So a woman who's, I mean, literally, I'm not joking now, you know, 500 pounds, proclaims that, look at sort of the sexist patriarchy that through Elle magazine and Penthouse and the porn industry and Hollywood teaches men to prefer these slimmer, you know, hourglass figures like Beyonce. And then meanwhile, you got all these beautiful women like myself who are sitting here at this speed dating event, twiddling my thumbs. Why? Because that's what men are taught, not to be attracted to 500-pound women. So now let's let's keep that for a second in the back of our mind. Then I saw another documentary or whatever report, I don't know what it was, where it was about men who love very big women, 500-pound women. And the women that were being interviewed were complaining that they hate the fact that their fatness is being fetishized.
Yes.
So now think about it, right? There are two states of the world. People can either dislike your fatness or they could like your fatness. There are no other alternate states of the universe. It's either A or not A. Both events
Are
of
wrong.
the universe are wrong. There's only one solution.
They're both
mass suicide. We have to kill ourselves. There's no alternative.
I don't understand how they can say, right? They can say that beauty is a myth, right?
Yes. Yes.
Aesthetics are yet another human universal,
yes.
right? They're when it comes to the sexual preferences of men, young, right? There's an evolutionary reason for that.
Yes, yes.
A certain body type it doesn't necessarily mean big boobs or big butt or what. It just a certain waist to hip ratio is preferred by men across cultures. Heightened neoteny is perceived as
look at you throwing all those evolutionary big words around.
Is perceived as both more socially they're women who are neotenous are perceived as nicer.
Yes.
And also more sexually attractive.
Yes.
Right? And healthy, clear skin, signs of health and fitness, symmetry of features, all of those things. Even if you look at like women, you know, the whole trope, chicks dig scars.
Yes.
Right? Well, chicks do dig scars, but they don't dig acne scars on a man. Right? They don't dig scars that are signs of poor health. They dig scars that are signs of, fuck, you survived that. Holy shit. Right? That's what they prefer. That's what, you know, that scar on Harrison Ford's chin, how did he get that? Oh my goodness, I want to know. Yeah. Right? All of those things, right? There's an evolutionary basis, a very obvious one for all of these things. I mean, I would say, yes, test it, but I would say that it should be so obvious that it doesn't really need.
And it has been tested, incidentally. It has been tested in the most, again, going back to the idea of, just so storytelling. Well, the universality of mating preferences has been tested in so many extraordinarily rigorous ways. I mean, not just the fact that they do it across cultures, which already is a incredibly powerful piece of evidence, right? If you could go to 60 different cultures that are radically different on every possible metric that you could think of in terms of how a culture is defined, and yet you replicate the exact same mating preferences, that's saying something. But you don't have to just do that. You could look at art pieces from 3,000 years ago from, you know, completely different cultures that otherwise have nothing to do with one another, and do a content analysis of the statues of the female statues, and then you'll get the same hourglass figure. So there's an incredibly broad range of data that supports this. But again, it's not a very hopeful message, because if I don't have the evolutionarily desired metrics, what does that mean? I'm out of the mating game. Now, the way that I usually try to strategically cater to that concern is that I argue that, and I don't do it in a Machiavellian sense, because it's true what I'm about to say, in most cases, mating is what's called a compensatory process, meaning that you could compensate if you score poorly on one measure by doing well on others, right? So, for example, I am not, women on average prefer taller guys than shorter guys. I am not a tall guy, yet I've been pretty successful with women because, and I have a beautiful wife, because I can compensate for my lack of height by hopefully having other valuable traits. And so there are contexts where mating is a non-compensatory mechanism. In other words, where you can't compensate if you score poorly on something. So if I go out, for example, to a bar and I say, I just want to hook up. Yeah, I want to hook up, and I only want to have sex with a person who scores 8 or higher, right? Now, if you don't score higher than that, then there is no way for you to compensate by scoring. So there are situations where mating is a non-compensatory process, but for most purposive mating decisions, it really is a full package. So even if I score poorly on, I could be very funny or charming or hardworking or ambitious or intelligent, and hopefully I can make up for my lack of height. And same thing. Now, of course, if you're hideously unattractive, you're probably not going to get somebody who is going to be physically gorgeous, let's say if a woman. But again, you could compensate for it. And usually that assuages a bit their fear. They don't feel suddenly that they are doomed to a life of celibacy.
I think one of the things that has actually put a lot of women, a lot of the sort of the unattractive women, the very overweight women, or I guess ugly. I don't like that term, but yeah, just sexually unattractive women. What has kind of bit them in the ass is the fact that monogamous lifelong marriage is no longer a thing, right? And so when everybody was pairing up for life, then you would have a smaller pool of men that you could choose from, and they would probably be more likely to be on your level of attractiveness, but they would also have a smaller pool of options, and they would be expected to choose one of those options, right? And so you pretty much had, as a woman, you pretty much had, good chances of not just getting sex, but getting a partner, right? Now, you have this situation where fives and fours on the 1 to 10 scale of women, they can get sex. They just have to they can't get sex necessarily with the men that they find attractive, or they can get relationships, but they definitely can't get relationships with the men that they find attractive.
Right.
And they feel like absolutely unsatisfied. They have a huge amount of dissatisfaction. And one of the things that really I think frustrates me is this. It's not all men did not benefit from the sexual revolution.
Right.
The top 20% of men benefited, and so you have this top 20% of men who can get laid, sort of not whenever they want, but they have a reasonable chance of getting laid whenever they go out and seek sex. And they're often these sort of average women, these fours, fives, and sixes, right? They're able to get a hookup with those guys.
Of course.
And so somehow now that in their mind translates into, I can actually get a lifelong commitment out of a man of that quality, right? And I'm sorry, ladies, it's just not. You have to offer something else. Like, I'm a 44-year-old woman. My boyfriend is 32 years old. Okay,
This is your case? Is this?
Yes, this is me.
Okay.
And I've been with him for 5 years, and I don't think he's going anywhere. In fact, the only reason why our relationship continued through the bumpy start was that I convinced him that I wasn't going anywhere, right? and whenever he talks to women in their early to mid 20s who are hitting on him because he's got a good career now, he makes good money, he wears a nice leather jacket when he goes out, and he has a very nice computer, and he will be obviously being observed to do engineering work on that computer when he's at the bar waiting for me to get off work, right? And so there's all these signals of fitness mate wise that he's giving off, and so these young women hit on him, and he just looks at me and he says, yeah, I had some girl, she was like really laying it on thick, and she just reminds me why I'm with you.
Well, he's a keeper.
Well, it's because he's like, they don't talk about anything interesting, he says. They're self-absorbed, they're narcissistic, they're solipsistic, they giggle way too much.
Yes.
It's almost like they never became adults. And he just like he's like, I have nothing in common with these women.
Now, do you think, and forgive me if I ask this question, do you think that it might get rougher as you get a bit older? And in other words, him being 12 years younger than you doesn't carry the same implications across the life cycle. Do you follow where I'm going with this?
I do. I absolutely do. I think I'm lucky in the sense that, like, people tell me that I don't look like I'm in my 40s.
True.
And they ask me how I accomplish that, and I say, well, I drink and I smoke and I never use sunscreen. So don't you feel bad for asking now? Um, so I'm hoping that my genetics, because like when we're standing side by side out in public, we don't look out of place together, and I'm
Gotcha.
hoping that that will continue. And he's got as many gray beard hairs in his beard as I have on my head,
Ah, okay.
um, and so I'm hoping that that lasts. And if not, like I have an aunt in Denmark, and she's got to be getting on to almost 90, and her boyfriend of the last, I guess she got with him, she never married him, but they've been together for over 30 years, and he is younger than her oldest son.
Well, here's to Karen's aunt, grandma or aunt or.
And my aunt Greta. So yeah,
By the way, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
and he adores her. He
Right.
still adores her, and he still is just they just are very, very good together, and all of that. So I'm hoping that that will be what this turns into, and all of that.
From your lips to the cosmos's ears.
There you go. I'm gonna pray. I'm gonna pray. If there's one thing I would pray about, it would be that.
But
Oh,
incidentally, you were talking about short-term mating, like hookups versus long-term.
yeah.
There's a very elegant theory in evolutionary psychology called sexual strategies theory. Are you familiar with it?
Oh, I'm sure what it means is that due to changes in the environment or changes in the incentives and disincentives that exist, that men will opt for predatory mating strategies or cooperative ones, and women will opt for really good genes over the sort of displays of competent fatherhood.
Right.
Um,
Cat
yeah,
versus dad. Yeah. Well, but more generally than what you said, it really uh, breaks up mating behaviors, preferences, desires into the temporal context of the relationship, short term versus long term.
right.
The idea being that you can't really speak about human mating behavior as though the temporal element were not a key driver of guiding my behavior. And so what I might look for, I might find a promiscuous woman to be her promiscuity is terribly attractive if I am seeking a short-term mating opportunity, and it's profoundly unattractive if I'm seeking a long-term mating opportunity. And
Yeah.
so that, if you like, really allowed us to understand many phenomena that otherwise would have been too difficult to place under one theoretical explanation if you just talked about mating as
Yeah.
though the duration of, right. So when you talked about the guy with the scar, the guy with the scar is particularly attractive when women go, I mean, speaking as a evolutionary consumer psychologist, right, shopping for good genes, right? I
Yes.
mean, not that the scar is itself a marker of genes, right? He acquired that through his life experiences. But if he also has testosterone markers, and if he has
The ability to survive a catastrophic injury or
exactly,
all kinds of fights. Yeah.
then that guy, so the CAD is very, very attractive if the lady is shopping for good genes, and is not at all attractive if she's looking for dad markers. And so, and of course, as you undoubtedly know, even within a single woman, forgetting about long-term or short-term mating, across her menstrual cycle,
Yes.
her preferences change, right? So her CAD versus dad preferences, so when she is in the ovulatory phase of her menstrual cycle, then the CAD markers become that much more important, because that's when she's shopping for good genes. So again, one of the beauties of one of the nice things about the research that I do is that I really pick problems. I mean, not strategically. I just follow whatever interests me. But
Yeah.
at times, I've picked problems that I knew would make it very difficult for the social constructivists to argue, oh, but this is just due to learning, right? So when I study something like the effect of the menstrual cycle on women's consumer behavior,
Yeah.
it's unbelievably difficult for some buffoon to come along and say, oh, but that's just due to cultural learning, right? I mean, it's difficult to see how progesterone and luteinizing hormones affect, right? So in a sense, there is a way that you could dismantle their stuff if you pick the problems and research questions that you pick carefully. So another example, which some of the viewers might have already heard me talk about, I did a study where I looked at the effects of conspicuous consumption on men's testosterone. So if you make men engage in sexual signaling in the context of consumer behavior, have them drive a fancy Porsche versus some cheap cars, cheap sedan, old sedan. And this is not imagine you were doing it, right? We actually made them do it. They actually did. And then we collected salivary assays at the end of each of the driving conditions. What do you think happens? The guy, when he is peacocking, his endocrinological system explodes. His testosterone goes up. Well, it's difficult for somebody to come, but that's just due to learning. It's due to culture. It's due to, right? So there is a way to attack the social constructivist movement, but it takes a lot of effort to
It
get
really does. I mean, you have to have like absolute ironclad proof,
right.
right? And absolutely no way that they could like criticize you or say, oh, well, but it wouldn't in every context, or
Right.
not everyone would, but I mean, like there are so many things. I don't know if you know who Robert Sapolsky is, right?
Yes, of course, he's my
And
man.
what he seemed to find is that the link between testosterone and aggression doesn't seem to be a causal link. I mean, like you need it, just like there's a causal link between oxygen and shoplifting. Like you need oxygen in
Right.
your system to be able to shoplift, um, but it's after men have engaged in aggression and won,
Yeah, that
right?
testosterone goes up. Yeah.
That they get their
Yeah.
increased testosterone. And when you actually look at mandrills, because they have the brightly colored faces, right? When a dominant male is deposed by another male, and he's no longer top dog, his colors fade almost overnight,
You're speaking my language.
right?
You're not work.
So essentially, but one of the things too that I wanted to maybe touch on with you is that the female menstrual cycle, right? And I don't know if this is a technical term, like a scientific term, sexual crypsis, but I've heard it referred to
Do
as
you
sexual
mean
crypsis.
you mean cryptic ovulation?
Yes,
Yeah.
concealed
Yeah.
ovulation, right? And a lot of people in the circles that I travel in, right, they say that this evolved so that a woman could marry the pencil-necked accountant who would be a devoted provider and father, right, while banging the tennis pro,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Okay. But if, like, I did stumble across some research done by someone at the University of Tennessee who used a mathematical model to sort of essentially describe our first sexual revolution. Our first sexual revolution would have been the transition from tournament toward monogamy and toward invested fatherhood, right? And when you look at baboons and other animals like that, and you see sort of consortships occur between subordinate males and a favored female, and sometimes those females want to reward, and they will reward them with sex, and nobody bats an eye when they're not in estrus.
Right.
Right. But when they are in estrus, the dominant male who, you're part of my harem, I'm going to mate guard you.
Right.
You're not leaving my sight. Right. And some of these female baboons will engage in like really intricate strategies to divert his attention or exhaust him or, cause a distraction or, essentially do a let's you and him fight. And then while these two dominant males are fighting, she goes off and she mates with that
Right.
nice guy and gives him reproductive sex. And the way that these subordinate males approach these females to build that relationship where they're consorts, they're best buddies, and sort of hook up friends with benefits, right?
Right.
Essentially, is they help them with their kids and they share
Right.
their food and they do all these things that fathers do. And part of me has always thought maybe that cryptic ovulation thing evolved because the first monogamous couples were cheating.
Right. So there's a lot of stuff there. So I don't know which one I'll tackle first. First, I'll say that so cryptic ovulation. One argument for why it would have evolved is in line with what you're saying, but also it's if you've got your long-term partner, you want to keep him vested in you throughout the cycle. In
Yeah.
other words, you don't want him to be only paying attention to you when he knows that not paying attention to you would be a bad idea. And so if you want, to the extent that we're a biparental species and it really matters to have my continuous investment in you, keeping me guessing as to where your fertile cycle is, independently of the fact that you want to go with the male Olympic swimmer, that's a separate issue. Just keeping me vested in you, that itself would be ameliorated by having cryptic ovulation. Now, interestingly, so a second point, there is some research that shows that, you know, while we could classify humans as within the rubric of cryptic, and that it's not sort of conspicuous signaling of your ovulatory status, it's not quite as cryptic as we otherwise
like to think. Yeah.
Right. And so there's wonderful research that shows that some men, and actually it'll be interesting to know if there are predictors that, and I don't think there's any research that has looked at that, you know, are there men who are better able to detect those cues than others? What we do know, for example, is that your hue changes. We know that symmetry changes within the same woman across her menstrual cycle. So I'll give you a manifestation of that. In a somewhat consumer setting done by a colleague of mine who beat me to the study. I had also independently the idea of doing the study, but he beat me to it. It's Jeffrey Miller, who's an evolutionary psychologist at University of New Mexico, a good friend of mine. And he did a study with a few colleagues where they looked at the amount of tips that are garnered by strippers, right? And what they showed is that when the women were in the ovulatory phase of their menstrual cycles, they garnered larger tips. Now, in a sense, that speaks to the cryptic ovulation issue because, excuse me, it is saying one of two things. So one of two reasons this could have happened, the tip effect. Either the women dance in a more lascivious manner, provocative, and that attracts the men, or men are also picking up subtle cues and hence are more likely to ask the one who's ovulating and ask her to stay longer and dance for more dances. So both mechanisms could be working, but that suggests that, yeah. So I think that it's not as cryptic as we'd like it to think. And thirdly, your point about the friendly guy who you go with on the side. Are you familiar with the term? And excuse me, I'm going to use. I think it's called the sneaky fucker effect.
Yes, the sneaky fuckers. The ones that actually they present, they sort of phenotypically even present size and what they look like. They present as like, if you're female.
Exactly.
So that they can sneak in and get some boon, right?
Exactly. So there's this big, this happens, for example, in some fish species.
Walruses and stuff like that too.
Well, or lower order, let's say with fish. So you've got this very dominant male fish that guards the access to the females. And then there is this, as you said, there's this phenotype of a male that looks like the female. So the big brutish male sees this female and goes, yeah, okay, you're one of my girls, get in there. And when he gets in there, right? So to speak. And, you know, I've often wondered, and here we're in the land of conjecture, to use your word that you mentioned earlier. So I don't know, maybe somebody could take this idea and run with it for their thesis. This idea of, you know, the friend guy, you know, the guy who's always available for you to cry on your shoulder. The emotional
tampon,
The emotional tampon guy, or the guy who it's not even clear if he's gay or not.
Yeah.
But in reality, he's not. Well, I think he is following the sneaky fucker effect.
I think you're right, and I think that women's propensity to favor men who look more like Ryan Reynolds and less like Clive Owen when they're not ovulating.
Yes.
That gives those particular men who have slightly more androgynous features. They're not really physically hyper masculine. They're not covered with scars. They're not Vikings essentially.
What am I? Am I Ryan Reynolds or am I Clive Owen?
You know what? You're Clive Owen, and it's that the epic beard really does it. You know, the facial hair is a demonstration of dominance. I think in men, I think that one of the reasons why it has become sort of out of fashion in the business world. In the business world, where you are essentially working on a system where you're trying to convince someone who is a potential rival, someone from another company, that yes, you can trust me, and yes, I want to
Right.
treat fairly with you, and yes, we're going to do this tit for tat exchange, and we're going to both come out, benefiting from it. And it's a completely different way of relating to other males than, say, warfare.
Right.
um like warriors would be bearded, maybe, but beards, you don't want to necessarily advertise your dominance if you're in a business setting, if you're in a white collar job, and um you have to convince other men to trust
So I
you.
wonder if so. Picking up on the point that you just said, have you noticed? And being in Edmonton, surely you must have. Have you noticed how all the hockey players, as you enter the playoffs, they all grow beards? It just becomes a beard love fest. Have you noticed that?
I haven't noticed it. I'm not a big hockey fan, but it wouldn't surprise me. I think
Everybody. I mean,
because it
everybody has these massive beards, but only during the playoffs.
Well, if you look at height and how it influences just the ability to negotiate foot traffic on the street, right? And so you're a tall man versus a short man, and you're walking against traffic on a sidewalk, right?
Yes, yes.
And the number of collisions that you're going to get into as a short man are going to be like numerous and possibly injurious. And the ones, nobody bumps into you when you're a tall man. It's like the parting of the Red Sea. It's like right? And everybody just goes around you. And beards, I think, do that exact same thing.
Right,
It's sort of, here I am, like, get out of my way.
right.
So, and I love beards. I really do.
Well,
Right?
I'm
And
happy to
it's because
oblige.
I'm not threatened by masculinity. Right. But I think a lot of people are. And I think that getting back to the sneaky fuckers,
Yes, yes.
I think that the fact that women prefer those more androgynous, more effeminate men during that particular, and during quite a while of their cycle, that gives those men the opportunity to maybe demonstrate the compensatory qualities that
Yes.
they have, and then maybe be able to snag a long-term relationship with that woman.
So let me ask you this: do you have feminist friends?
I had one. I had one for years. I think she's still my friend. I moved away from where I was living in BC before, and we really haven't caught up. I think she discovered what I was doing online, and she was not impressed.
Okay.
But for our entire friendship, there were topics that were just off limits. Like
Right.
we just sort of mutually, tacitly agreed that we're not going to discuss this because we won't be able to remain friends if we do.
Right.
So, and there are other women that I have worked with, who would describe themselves as feminists, but I don't tend to get very close to them.
Have you? I asked because there was a study. I believe I was asked to serve as a reviewer on the paper, and at the time I rejected the invitation because I was busy with other stuff. And the paper has since been published. Uh, it's a paper. I think it was published in Frontiers of in Neuroscience, or anyways, if somebody's interested from the viewers, I could pull out the reference. It looked at feminists, and I was gonna describe this study and then see if it jived with your personal anecdotes. It looked at feminists and how masculinized they were. Have you heard about the study?
That they tend to be more
Yeah.
masculinized,
So
the finger length thing.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So it was, well, it's the digit ratio, right?
yeah.
It's the 2D 4D digit ratio, which is a putative marker of yeah, right. I'm so man, I'm about to explode from my testosterone.
Yeah.
Uh, but anyway, so they looked at feminists who were attending some feminist conference, and then they administered some psychometric scale to measure their masculinity, and then they also took some morphological features that captures how testosteronized they are. And not surprisingly, I mean, it was a small sample size, but not surprisingly, there was a correlation between feminist tendencies and these masculinity markers. And I was just curious, once I would mention these findings, whether you could link it anecdotally to your personal experiences.
You know, as a masculinized female, I can't link it to my own personal experience. I've never thought to look at my friend, and I don't think that she was highly masculinized. She was definitely not at the point where I knew her. I would not have called her attractive, but she was attractive enough when she was younger. She's a little older than me. She's got to be about 50 now or something. Um, when she was young and single, she attracted very attractive men,
Mm.
right? So I think it was sort of weight and age and the vagaries of life and all of that that kind of took their toll on her. But as far as that goes, the small sample size would trouble me. And like I can sort of see it depending, right? Like, because I have known like really brutally feminist women, gotten to know them in my time as a writer of erotic fiction for women. And
You were a writer of, is that right? Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Oh.
And so I got to know this one, and she was completely batshit fucking insane and so hostile. She got kicked off of pretty much every website she ever went on just for being like abusive to people. And she had these sort of tendencies of paranoid tendencies. So she would go to some place and she would talk like a whole bunch of shit about me, right? Because I pissed her off once, right? I argued with her and proved her wrong once, and so everywhere she went for like months after that, she'd have something nasty to say about me, and then I would come in and I would defend myself, and then she would accuse me of attacking her, right? And then she would, and I never wrote about her on my blog, not at all. And she would make posts on her blog about my active hate campaign about against her, right? And so I mean, like, she was just completely fucking lunatic. And she went so far as to accuse a HIV positive gay Navy veteran of being a homophobe because he said this does not offend me as a gay man, right? And she's like, "You're a homophobe," and
You've internalized it.
she's a straight white woman, right? And but one of the things that she said was that she was always so much more interested in things that the boys got to do, and she was always so much more interested in Legos, and she was almost in, like and building things and all of that and playing with dolls, and she hated dresses, and her parents made her do those things. Her parents bought her dolls. Her parents would not let her be who she wanted to be, would not let her climb trees and skin her knee and catch frogs and do all of those fun things that she saw the boys doing. And so I had the feeling that she was a masculinized woman like me, but she was not blessed with my parents,
Right.
right?
Who gave you the freedom to be yourself and so on.
Absolutely. Like, they never, my mom used to call me an odd duck, right? And when she wasn't calling me a Philadelphia lawyer. And, but other than saying, you're different, that's okay. You're different and that's okay. Um, so part of me thinks that, like, for some of these women, we could have all been saved a whole lot of grief if their parents had just bought them some Legos and, a pair of Oshkosh Bagosh jeans or something when they were little. But I would say that nowadays, right, and I'm not talking about the academics necessarily, the people who are in the positions of power, but sort of the foot soldiers. I think that so many of them are hyper feminine.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think that they are at the extreme end. If Simon Baron Cohen's extreme male brain is the autism spectrum, right? Then the Badcock, what a name.
Yeah.
Badcock posits
Christopher Badcock,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah, posits that the extreme female brain is psychotic spectrum disorders like borderline and narcissistic and histrionic personality disorder. I would say that that is more prevalent among these foot soldiers, among these young women who take women's studies and they get indoctrinated, and then they're screaming things in people's faces at protests and stuff like that. Um, because it seems to just because so much of even feminist theory falls so much in like that megalomania, delusions of persecution, and delusions and erotomania, right? That's rape culture.
Right.
Right. And
Right.
so I would actually rather than masculinized, feminized. I would actually love it if some very brave researcher went in and tested feminists at a conference to see how many come up on the indicators of personality disorders.
Oh boy, it's gonna be tough to get granting money for that one.
Oh, it would have to be a brave, brave researcher with tenure.
You're gonna need private
And
funding for that one.
yeah, I think
Uh,
so. And maybe I could crowdfund it.
True. I wanted to ask something else. I forgot. Not ask. I want to mention something else. I can't remember. Anyways, go on. As you were speaking, I heard everything you said. I said, "Oh, I have to tell her about this," and now my
Oh,
mind.
now it's gone. I hate that. I
I know
freaking hate that. I do that all the time. And sometimes I have to give this big, long, convoluted answer to a question. And by the time I get around to where I've set
you
things up,
forgot why it was right.
I don't even know what question I'm answering. I'm like, you're going to think I'm stupid, but what was the question again?
But
Um,
I do remember another point. Since we're on feminism, I often it's great the difference in the reaction that I get from feminists as a function of whether whatever it is that I'm saying supports their narrative or doesn't support it, right? So, for example, if I talk about uh, the multitude of research streams that speaks to why women have not evolved to be Victorian prudes, then of course, they're very, very happy with that. So, for example, I could say, hey, I could use the testicle size across species, that one, right? So that humans have larger testicles on average compared to other primates. That's an adaptation to female promiscuity. That's one example. Another example would
yeah.
be the spermores of Baker, right? That there are 3 types of sperm in the ejaculate that would have evolved as chemical weaponry against the possibility that a woman would have been with multiple males in 72
And,
hours.
and, and the more time your wife spends away from you, the higher your sperm count
There
is,
you go,
and
all
the
those things. So
greater the proportion of those warrior sperm. And yeah.
exactly. So you put all that together, and the conclusion is women also have a profound ability and desire to want to cheat. Now,
Yeah.
there they'll come to me and say, "Bravo, Dr. Saad, what a brilliant scientist you are." Uh, from the other side of their mouth, as I then explain why men might have evolved a greater penchant for sexual variety. Not that women also don't desire that, but maybe not to the same extent. And here are some evolutionary reasons. What do you think happens then?
Oh yeah, no,
Ooh,
now
boo,
you're a
Nazi.
horrible sexist. You're like a fascist. Oh my God. Why do you want to keep women chained to their stoves,
Exactly.
making you sandwiches?
So it's amazing how you see how much they are blinded by their ideology to the point that they truly lose their ability to reason, because in some cases it literally is the same person
Yeah.
who 1 minute thought you were a genius and the next you are Dr. Mengele, head of the SS machinery. So it's
Well,
just
okay, you're still in that stage, right? You're not notorious enough yet, okay?
right.
Because now, even when I say things that actually agree with certain feminist things, right? Like, so someone like Mary Koss, right? Her entire justification for separating out as a category, separating it out from rape on her survey that she consulted with for the CDC, she consulted on all the definitions. She essentially said that it's a fundamentally different act when a woman forces a man into intercourse than the other way around. And some of those reasons are because it's that the immediate trauma is not as great on average when it comes to male victims of female perpetrators and stuff like that, right? And I can actually say that yeah, that actually does make sense in terms of uh, what it would have cost a man to be taken advantage of 200,000 years ago by a woman that he didn't, by Alice the Goon, than what it would have cost a woman to be taken advantage of by Ron Jeremy's uglier cousin, right? That
Now
there,
that's anti-Semitic because Ron Jeremy is Jewish, so you're
I
anti-Semitic
had
right
no
there.
idea. What is he doing? Like
That's anti-Semitism.
he's a porn star, like a Jewish porn star. Who would have thought it? Um, but essentially, and I can say that, okay, I can see her point in that, right? Um, and they'll just say, "You're just like you internalized misogyny. You just
Right.
hate women." Blah blah blah. Like they don't even listen to
Right.
me long enough to hear that I'm agreeing with something,
Right.
right, that was said by a feminist before they're screaming at me that, they just I just feel sorry for her. I feel sorry for anybody who hates herself that much, right? And I'm just like, oh my, and I think she should be raped, and and she just looks like a man,
Right.
and she's only doing it because she's jealous of prettier women, and she's just doing it to hold on to a man, and all of this like brutally sexist stuff that
Right.
if Rush Limbaugh were to say it about like freaking Sandra Fluke, like they'd string him up, they'd run up a gibbet,
Well, what
right?
was that expression you said? If they do it, it's not the. What was the expression you said?
There
If the.
are no bad
Oh,
tactics, only bad targets.
I like that one a lot. Very good.
Yeah, no,
Uh,
it embodies their philosophy perfectly.
I remembered what I wanted to say to you.
Mm.
When you said about erotica, you being a writer of erotica, it got me thinking about romance novels. Which I
Oh,
mean, right? You're talking about racier, right? What you wrote was racier than romance novels,
oh,
or
it's
what?
much more graphic.
Okay. But anyways, in the case of, because earlier we were talking about the mating preferences that men and women prefer and so on. Uh, I'm sure you already know this, but whenever I lecture about how to look for mating preferences in specific products, I always say if you want to know what is the evolved preference of women when it comes to men, do a content analysis of romance novels from around the world, and you basically find the same archetype of the same man in the 73 different cultures.
Yeah,
And then I basically describe that guy, and you see all the women sitting there giggling because they know that it's exactly the guy that
it
they've been
is. This
reading for
is
the past 20 years.
he's handsome. He's young, but he's not too young,
Yes,
right?
he's
He's
a
older than
count.
her.
He's
He's
a
older
count.
than her. He's sorry.
He's a count, like
Oh yeah,
royalty,
he has
and
extremely high status. He's a
right,
count. He's a count. He's a duke. He's a CEO. He's a self-made
right,
millionaire.
right.
He's something like that. He's got a dominant personality. He
He's risky,
often,
he's
yeah,
reckless, but
yes,
he will be tamed by the love of that one good woman. The tiger will be brought in.
yes, yes, and it's so obvious, right? And so here I am. I'm this woman. I'm writing these dirty books, right, for
Right.
women. And I was very like I took all of the tropes and I flipped them around, and uh I made my female protagonist highly masculine. In fact, she lived most of her life pretending to be a man, and
Mm.
and I made her extremely tough, and I had periods in the book where, I mean, like the opening scene of the book, the hero kicks her in the face, right, and tries to kill her, and and then he sexually assaults her at some point, right? He illegally restrains her and sexually assaults her, and then they sort of come to an understanding, and and she takes charge through the relationship, and like my books were called by feminist reviewers subversive and empowering to women. Okay.
How long
And
did you do that for?
if they knew that that person who wrote those books was me, right, who
Right.
makes these videos, they would flip their shit.
So is the cat out of the bag now today for the first time?
No, no, I
Okay.
wrote under pen name, and
All right.
I have not disclosed it.
So how long did you do this for?
I wrote for about well, I've been writing all my life fiction. I My published books were published over a span of 2.5 years. And then I kind of got into this and lost interest in that.
Okay.
But yeah, I have 4 books published, and they still sell, and in 2008 to 2010. So,
Are you familiar with this term slash fiction?
oh yeah,
Oh,
oh
you
yeah, no,
okay?
Kirk and Spock are apparently like
Yes.
just desperately in love with each other.
But do you know? I mean, do you
It's
know
mostly
why
straight
I would
women.
know? But do you know why I would know about this? Or can you guess? Can you venture why? No, it's not because I am a consumer of slash fiction.
No, I just
No,
Just from your studies of human sexuality, maybe? I don't know.
because, well, you're exactly right. But there are two evolutionary psychologists, one of whom is a pioneer, Donald Simmons or Simons, wrote The Evolution of Human Sexuality in 1979, which is perhaps the first book to demonstrate very convincingly how you link evolutionary psychology to understanding, human sexuality. And one of his, I can't, her name is escaped. Oh, Catherine Salmon,
Okay.
who's a Canadian, who actually was a student of the two folks that I mentioned at the start of our chat, who wrote Homicide,
Right.
Martin Daly and Margot Wilson. She was a student of theirs, and they wrote a very short book together on an evolutionary explanation of slash fiction. And I think you'd get a real. That was my first and only exposure to this whole notion of slash. It blew my mind. I mean, I sat there and I read the whole book, I think, in one sitting. Anyways,
I I always had thought, because this is what straight female authors kept telling me, was the reason that they initially started writing slash fanfic, and then they started writing male erotica,
right.
their own original fiction, was because it was the only way that they could explore sexual agency as women, was to have two male characters, because they
Mhm.
don't see women as having sexual agency, which is completely backwards, because women have way more sexual agency than men.
Exactly. Women control the whole dance.
Yeah, they do.
We're just the baboons trying to get on the train.
Yeah, yeah. And if you, like, the whole idea that rape is something that's condoned by the culture, when in reality, if a man, the whole reason why studs are held in, I wouldn't say in high esteem, right? I think that they're still condemned as dogs and players and stuff, but there's a little bit of admiration there,
Right.
right? And it's because convincing multiple women to have sex with you is really difficult. It
Yeah.
takes a lot of skill and a lot of charm and a fake job, and a nice car that you traded the rental plates for
Right.
some other plates before you went on your date, right? It takes all of that in order to convince lots and lots of women to have sex with you. A rapist is sort of seen as the scum of the earth even by other men, because he is so little of a man that he's unable to convince even one woman to willingly lie down with him,
Right. Right.
right? And so he has to resort to this, to circumventing her will, circumventing her attraction, and he doesn't even care
Right.
about whether she is attracted to him, and what kind of piece of shit is that, right? That he would, like, most men wouldn't even be able to get it up if they thought that their partner was not into it,
Right.
and so it's just a failure of manhood. It's a failure of traditional masculinity.
Have you heard of the book that came out in 2000 by Thornhill and Palmer? Thornhill is actually somebody that I know well, a good friend of mine, where they looked at an evolutionary explanation of rape.
Yes.
Are you familiar with that book?
Yes.
Just for the readers, I mean, I certainly welcome you to check out the book. But as a kind of an inside story, when I had been invited by the group with Thornhill at the University of New Mexico, where Jeffrey Miller is also there, they have a great group of evolutionary behavioral scientists. And we were having a chat, and I actually asked him, how bad did it get in terms of the blowback? I mean, imagine here's a guy who's writing a book about possible, adaptive stories as to why men might rape, which of course everybody assumes means you're condoning it, you're justifying it, it's okay, it's part of nature, it's science. And he said at one point, I mean, the cops had to kind of be around, I think, because they were throwing rocks through the windows. I can't remember. I mean, I think there was physical. And you're thinking, again, this is happening, I mean, not in Taliban land, right? Not in Yemen. This is happening at a major American university. He's a very respected and respectable scientist. Maybe he's wrong in his theories, in which case, prove him wrong. But
Yeah.
the fact that there could have been potential physical violence, if I remember the story correctly, is quite disheartening.
It is, and like on the flip side of that, I seem to recall that there were a couple of sort of humanities professors or something like that, or like people who would have been not necessarily feminists, but among that sort of larger
Right,
group
right.
of disciplines. And they wrote a piece in the British Journal of Medical Ethics on post-birth abortion. And
Oh, yes,
they
yes.
argued that that women, mothers only, should have the right to murder their children um, after giving birth, up to, and their reasoning is actually fairly sound in and of itself, right? That if you have a lottery ticket in your pocket and it's a winning ticket and you lose it before you realize it was a winning ticket, what have you lost? Nothing,
Right.
right? And so if the child has no concept of tomorrow or a future or whatever, they don't know what they have been deprived of by being murdered. Whereas the mother has all of these concepts and would understand how she's being inconvenienced by the existence of this child,
Yes.
whether she has to take care of it or whether she adopts it out. She is aware of the existence of this child, and it might distress her in ways that being, I guess, humanely euthanized would not distress a child of a year and a half or 2 years old who doesn't have the concept of tomorrow yet, right? And so, I mean, they were shocked. They were shocked that they got death threats. They were
I
appalled that they got death threats. And I'm thinking to myself, how can you be shocked by this, right? Like,
right.
I mean, because saying that there is maybe a biological basis for rape, at least the rape of men against women, I think that the rape of women against men would maybe have different uh,
Right.
roots in biology if these roots exist, but the different adaptive strategies and stuff like that. Um, but just saying that there is some basis in biology for this behavior, and that if we can identify those bases, if we can identify those factors, then maybe we can
It helps the problem.
apply a effective treatment to this
Exactly.
problem, right? That's going to get death threats. Whereas I think women should be able to, like, smother their babies, and it shouldn't just be not considered criminal. It should be considered socially acceptable. Um, and they're right to
I
do
wrote
it
I
as
wrote
women.
about that on my Psychology Today blog. I wrote about that.
Oh,
I didn't actually. I mean, I didn't try to take a strong position. I just kind of presented the case because it seemed like such a, if I remember correctly. But here's another one that I thought you might find interesting. And that one I did get blowback, and from a surprising group. So I don't remember the name of the person, but a few years ago there was a very attractive female teacher who was, let's say, 23 years old, who had had sex with, for the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to embellish it,
oh,
who was 17 years old, 364 days old. Hence, he wasn't yet 18. Therefore, he was just a child who didn't know anything, who happened to also be the star quarterback. Again, I'm not sure I'm engaging in
yeah.
hyperbole, but for the right. I mean, clearly a young, healthy male who was not a child, right? He was a older teenager.
And he wasn't marginalized. He
He
was a
wasn't
high status
marginal, right?
individual.
Who was probably, I think, like, videotaping their sexual encounter. His status had gone up. So, I mean, he was anything but a victim. And so I said, look, ethically, of course, she's wrong. Morally, of course, she's wrong. Legally, we could, of course, talk about that. Now, that you would put her as a sex offender, you put a bracelet around her because we now have to track her, and because she's a rapist of children.
Yes.
The guy is maybe 6'2" or whatever he was, and who, of course, every young boy who's 16 or 17 goes to bed and says, "Oh, please, please, God, if you exist, let me be raped by a 23-year-old sexually available, beautiful woman."
Yeah.
So I basically argued, look, in a sane world, we would recognize that we're not going to be blind to human nature, and we're going to recognize that the crime of sexual predation on children is almost exclusively men who engage in that. And if we're going to put bracelets around people, it's probably not a good idea in this case where she's 23 and he's 17 and so on. Incidentally, when she got released on parole, she violated her parole for the following reason. She was working at a fast food restaurant. I hope I don't get all the details wrong. You can go to my blog and check it out.
Right.
And she wasn't allowed to speak to children or be in contact with them and talk to them about, sensitive issues. It turns out that one of her coworkers at the McDonald's or Wendy's or wherever she was working was telling her about the relationship problems she was having with her boyfriend, right? And that was a violation because she was engaging in a sexual discussion with a child again, and therefore her parole, right? So when you have such a departure from not only reason and common sense, but from understanding sexual dimorphism, right? I mean, we have fixed amount of resources to solve the problem of not having our children attacked, and going after men who are in vans outside of schoolyards is really where you want to be focusing. Most sexual predators are men. Now, guess who I got the blowback from in this case?
Oh, maybe men's rights activists.
Well, so I don't know. Well, so I don't know if they were formally men's rights activist members, but it was men saying that I was condoning child rape.
Oh, I would not say that in this instance you were condoning child rape. I would say that that in this instance, in the assertion that most sexual predation is committed by men, I would have to say that's not necessarily the case.
What do you think the numbers are?
The numbers, oh God, if you actually look at self-reports of women who not like that 1 in 3 college men would rape, say they would rape if they could get away with it, but this many women said that they had engaged in coercion or physical force, threats with weapons, a man's incapacitation in order to obtain sex from someone who is unwilling, right? You actually find numbers that are, sort of 1 in 8, 1 in 15, 1 in 40% in some cases, like 1 in 3. Like you can find numbers of women saying, "Yeah, I did that." And you look at
you mean on men or on children?
On men, right?
Okay,
And this is just on men.
okay.
And if you look at Kidscape, is a charity in the UK, and they did a survey study type thing, and they found that 86% of children who were reporting sexual abuse to people, mostly to people with a duty of care, so police, hotlines, counselors, teachers, whatever, parents, whatever, right? But they'd reported that they were being sexually abused. 86% of them were not believed if they said that their abuser was a female.
Right.
Right. And so I think that this is like a hidden thing that we just don't look at. So I think that, like, I would, the scenario that you described, the kid who's 1 day shy of 18, even if in my considered opinion, a 16-year-old girl and a 23-year-old male teacher, depending on the situation and how it was initiated, right? I mean, when I was 15, the guy I wanted to lose my virginity to was 21, and he refused.
Right.
Right. And out of, I guess, a fit of, spite or whatever. And I think he refused because he knew he would potentially be in trouble with the law. Right. The next week, I just found the closest guy who was willing to do it, to divest me of my pesky virginity. Because, it was just, this thing is standing in my way, and it's depriving me of actually getting with this guy that I want to be with, or I want to, have an experience with, even if it's not going to pan out too much, right? But it just seemed like this big thing that guys were scared of, right? I don't want to be the one to deflower you, because then I'm, you could put me in jail.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And so, you know, I was a precocious 15-year-old girl, and I went out and I got the sex I wanted. And there are 15-year-old girls, 16-year-old girls, 17-year-old girls who have a crush on their teacher or their teacher's aide or whatever, and absolutely pursue that. And I don't think those men need to be going to prison for years for raping those
Right.
girls. I think that maybe they should lose their jobs.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I think that ethically, you can't really break that boundary,
Yeah.
even if it were between consenting adults, right? I mean, think about it at the university. It's an absolute no-no because you're in a position of power. And so no. But, you know, my parents got married when my mother was 15 going on 16. My father was 19. So clearly he must have been a child rapist since she was a child and he was an
Of
adult,
course.
you
Of
know?
course.
So,
I
so,
was
you know,
I couldn't believe I was watching Dr. Phil one day, and there was this couple on there, and I guess they're they were college high school sweethearts in a place with no where statutory rape was a strict liability offense and there were no Romeo and Juliet laws. And they were childhood sweethearts. And the moment her parents didn't like him, and the moment that he turned 18 before she did, they had him charged. And he served his time, and he's on the sex offender registry, and they're married now. As soon as he got out, they got
it's
married. They have kids
unbelievable.
together, and she's like, this, him being on the registry is tearing our lives apart. It I have the almost the full burden of the financial responsibility of this family because he can't find work because he's on that registry. And he did not victimize me. I never ever claimed that I was victimized by him, right? Everything was consensual. He was 3 months older than me, right?
Incredible.
Why did he serve 4 years in prison? Why is he on the registry for the next
And I
25?
suspect it didn't go too well for him when he was on the inside, right? Because if the word gets out that he was a child
Child
abuser,
rapist, yeah.
right?
No, and this just proves rape culture, right? It's like rape culture is an entire culture that condones and reinforces and normalizes the rape of women by men.
Right,
And yet, you know, after pedophiles, the first guys in line for a sharpened toothbrush between the ribs in prison are men who rape women.
right. We should go and check out a real culture that is uh, tough on women. Go walk around in the streets of Cairo or in the Middle East as a woman, and then come back to Wellesley College and tell me about that culture that you speak of.
You know, honestly, I think that we hear a lot of one-sided stuff from those cultures too. Our media is Western media, and they report on the things that they find interesting. And so I think that if you actually go into some of those Middle Eastern cultures and you look at the how women are treated and how men are treated, right? So you hear a lot. There's so much outrage about that woman who was stoned to death for adultery, right?
Mm,
Um, but you look at the executions, right? And it's like 99%
of
men,
course,
and often for things that are much less severe in the context of that culture.
right,
And so, I mean, you kind of have to look at, like, they don't treat women very nice. They don't treat men very nice. They really
right.
don't treat children very nice. It's
Animals,
just not a nice place to be
you're right.
for anybody, right? And so this is one of the things that I spend a lot of time doing is I um, try to get people to ask the question, yes, that culture doesn't treat women very nicely, but does that mean that culture is misogynist? Does that mean that culture treats women much more poorly than it treats men, right? And when you look at death rates and rates of death by violence and rates of child sexual abuse, right? In Afghanistan, the vast majority of the victims are boys.
Bachi boys.
Yeah, Bachi boys.
Yeah,
And they engage in that work because the girls are off limits
yeah, yeah,
by
of course.
law. And American soldiers have been ordered to ignore it.
But did you see recently? I won't mention his name because I don't want to give him the notoriety. But there's a uh, infamous guy who's very set in arguing that new atheists are the real problem in the world, and it's US and Zionism and so on. He basically spun the story of the American servicemen who were ordered to not intervene with
Yeah.
the abuse, this horrifying abuse of little children. he spun that as the U.S. military is complicit in the rape of children, right? So here you've got these guys who are itching to get involved, right? I mean,
Yes.
they really want to get in and
Yeah.
solve the problem and protect these,
And beat the shit out of the
and
people
beat the
who are
shit if not put a
using
bullet.
them. Yeah.
And then because of political correctness at the higher level,
Yeah.
telling them, hey, don't intervene because that's their culture and, you know, who are we, moral relativism, then this guy spins it, right? The self-flagellation of self-hatred is so pronounced that that person, and by the way, this is very much a progressive or regressive bent, right? Rather than pointing the finger on, I mean, the two most horrifying things to do in life is to abuse children and abuse animals, right? I mean, that's the two
Because we consider
diabolical.
them vulnerable.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
this guy did not see it. He didn't see it fit that he should attack the practice of the grotesque Afghani men. Rather, the fact that the American soldiers were ordered not to intervene demonstrates that ultimately the real evil
Is the
lies
American
in the
military.
Americans, right? And that's exactly my 6 degrees of Noam Chomsky thinking game.
Oh my God. Yeah, no, yeah, no. Whatever evil's going on in the world, Noam Chomsky could blame it
So
on the
so
US
you know my
military
game.
industrial complex. Yeah. It's really frustrating to me because there is so much suffering of men and boys
Right.
going on in certain places in the world that are our focus on those places, the Congo, Darfur, Sudan, right? All in Sierra Leone, and all of these places. There, our focus is primarily on women and children. And I have actually heard feminists say that women in those places are oppressed because 80% of the people in refugee camps are women and girls. And I'm like, well, what the fuck do you think happened to the men and boys?
Right.
They're not there because they're dead.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Or they've been forcibly conscripted at 8 years old, and which usually involves repeated rape,
Right.
right? And their fathers were castrated before their throats were cut, and they were thrown down a well, right? That's what those men and boys are going through in that place. And you're going to tell me that women suffer more because they had to like go to a refugee camp and they arrived there safely?
Well,
Like,
you familiar? I think it was Ezra Levant who I first heard say this, and I've taken. I love this kind of metaphor, this victimology poker. Do you know? Are you familiar with it?
no, I am not.
Like it's
I I
basically,
I do love Ezra Levant, but I'm
yeah. Well,
no.
I've independently come up with my own satire of the story. Basically, if you're playing poker, right? I mean, there's a hand that's the optimal one, whatever it is, royal flush or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And in victimology poker, there is kind of a hierarchy of hands you could hold that basically says you could not be a greater victim than me. And so, to the people who really identify their existence, right? Their raison d'être, as we say in French, is their victimology. If you then offer them a narrative that says, but you know, there's somebody who's actually more abused than you, as the example that you gave with the men versus the women, that really shatters their world because their whole identity is based on the fact that there is no greater victim than me. And
Yeah.
this is what happens to me when I deal with some of these regressives, because my personal history is one where I escaped Lebanon under imminent threat of execution, right? I mean,
And it wasn't by the Amish.
and it wasn't by the Amish, and it wasn't the new atheists, right? And so then you've got the Wellesley College kid who's trying to be Che Guevara, and then I come along. Well, then it's impossible for them because the narrative is simply overpowering. So then they kind of run away.
Well, what strikes me as amazing is that sort of modern feminism, modern SJWism is, I mean, like so many of these people who are very, very high up. So someone like uh, Steph Guthrie in Canada, someone like Alex Lifshitz in the U.S., right? A lot of these people, they are solidly middle to upper middle class. Some of them have trust funds,
Yeah.
right? Brianna Wu, her dad like just gave her a gift of $200,000 to start her company, and her game development company.
Is this the
And
one who just flip flopped on something? Is that
she I think she mentioned somewhere on Twitter that she'd had a cup of coffee with somebody who was pro Gamergate, and she thought that he was pretty much just a human being. And then all of her cronies just dogpiled her, and
Right.
she had to change her tune pretty quick. But you have all of these people, and a lot of these people are children of massive privilege. They were born into wealth. They were like Lena Dunham. She's like such a feminist icon who was born to two wealthy psychiatrists or whatever the no, that's Emma Solkowitz. But she was born into a wealthy family. Like these people who are claiming to be so oppressed. Like, okay, my dad was a mechanic. My mom did books for an advertising company,
Right.
right? And she was in the military as well. And my dad was raised during the Nazi occupation of Denmark, right? And his teacher beat the shit out of him when he was 10 years old for putting sulfuric acid on his teacher's chair and doing other bad things. And he was mauled by a dog when he was 6 and had to have his face reconstructed. I mean, like my parents are not, they didn't have easy lives. My mom was raised essentially, you had 2 sets of clothes. You had school clothes and play clothes, right? And when
Right.
you got home from school, you changed into your play clothes, and they were all washed once every week, right? So
Right.
you wore the same thing every day for a week. And when you got up in the morning, you broke the ice on the water basin before you splashed it on your face, right? Okay, that's what my parents grew up like, and they were blue collar people, and I was raised in a household that was just absolutely like money was there was always enough, but there was never a surplus.
Right.
And I'm not a feminist. I don't feel like I'm a victim. I graduated high school and then I went into cooking and then I went into waitressing and I've been blue collar ever since. And you know, and these people who their dads, their wealthy parents are paying for their post-secondary education, and they have they've they're in Ivy League schools, and they're telling me that they're oppressed, right?
So how do you
What
explain it? What do you think is it just the guilt at feeling that I have something that others don't, and therefore maybe I've garnered it in some inappropriate way, and the way that I can repent or pay penance is to self-flagellate? Because I mean, I
but
have
if
I
they
have
but if they were doing that, they wouldn't be saying that they're the ones who are oppressed. And for the women, most of
Mhm,
them are saying that they're the ones who are oppressed. The men are like, oh yeah, women are oppressed, and
mhm.
I have to be a good feminist ally. Um, but but it's these women that seem to be driving the whole thing. It's sort of a let's you and him fight thing that they get the men to involved, right?
Right.
To protect them, because chivalry is just like a brand new thing. This whole he for she thing, that's a totally revolutionary concept, right? It's never been tried in all of human history. Um, so yeah, but you look at them and how they tell me, and they like when I first started talking online, just sort of in comments and on forums and stuff like that, and they could claim, right? Most of them insisted that, oh, you're not actually a woman, you're a man. No woman would think the way you do. And then when I would manage to convince them that yes, I actually am a woman, they would say,
But
well,
you
you're
self-identify as a man.
wealthy, you're white and wealthy and straight and cis, and you
Right.
have all this privilege. And I'm
Right.
like, well, you got white right.
Right.
And it's like they somehow think that they like it's almost like they've been protected so much their whole lives. And this is one of the things that I really have a problem with about feminism, is that the reason why men achieve, right? Like you have two people, person A and person B, and person A, right? You just kind of he turns 18, you fucking change the locks and leave a shit out on the curb, and you're like, you're on your fucking own, right? And person B, you're like, oh no, 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 whatever happens, you can always count on us and we'll support you,
Right.
right? Who's gonna achieve?
Right.
Right?
Well, you can
What
apply
is
this.
feminism doing to help women become achievers when all they want to do is protect and coddle them?
And you could apply this, by the way, to not just at the individual level, in terms of at the aggregate level, the welfare state
Yes.
really creates the version B that you mentioned, right?
Oh, well, even as a man, even as a single father with custody of his kids, It's
Right.
harder to get state support. It's harder
Yeah.
to get welfare and food stamps and all of those things because
Well,
all of that's geared to women and their children.
one of the things that frustrates me in living in Quebec is that in the context of Canada, which is already very sort of social welfare and so on, Quebec is particularly so, right? It's very socialist.
Yes.
And
Well,
one of
they
the things
have to be in order to justify gobbling up all those transfer payments from Alberta.
right, true. Oh, now you're sounding like Ezra Levant, but yes, true. Uh, but anyways, to me, it's very frustrating because I always said that, living in Quebec, it's a system that's built to punish the doers and give to the losers, right? Because you're constantly trying to create equality of outcomes, right?
Yeah.
And you see it everywhere. You see it in the university setting where, God forbid that there should be any differences between the professors, even though Professor A is on the fast track to a Nobel Prize and Professor B is a borderline illiterate
Is
moron.
Easy Myers.
So right, exactly. It's BC Myers. She said it. Then but we have to find a way. The union comes in to create equality. So when people ask me, am I happy in Quebec? I mean, there are wonderful things about living here, but
Yeah.
for doers, for the archetype A that you mentioned, which I fit under, it's very, very punitive because I'm always asked to pay for the laziness and inaction and inability of others, and I don't think that I should have to. So, but
Yeah,
anyways,
no, I agree, and it's not saying that welfare shouldn't exist, that people have misfortunes, they have
exactly,
calamities happen to them, and they should have something that gets them by. It should be a stopgap. That's how I used it. I was on welfare for 6 weeks, you know, between when I moved from BC and when I settled here in Alberta after my divorce, right?
right.
Because there was just no way that I could um, support myself and my kids on
Well,
what I
listen,
was earning.
we
Sorry?
I'm sorry, go ahead. We moved from, as I said, we escaped Lebanon and came here. We had lost everything. This was in the mid-70s.
Yeah.
And my parents are such proud people that the idea that even though now we had access to this whole social welfare system, the idea that they would rely on someone else to, have them, and I mean, we're escaping death in Lebanon,
Yeah.
right? So it's not, right? Uh,
And if you have to rely on it, you're off it as soon as humanly possible. I mean,
exactly.
it's just like, yes, I'm grateful, and I'm really grateful for the fact that when I went in and applied, they looked at my history, and
Right,
and they looked at my history of being self-supporting, and they were like, let's do everything we can for you.
right,
And they bent over backwards. And when you look, and they said, how long are you going to need to be on this? And I said, until I'm out of this situation. And once I'm out of this situation, I'm never going to be on it again.
right.
And I made it happen, right? But there are some people that just it is a way of life, and that needs to change. That needs to be mitigated in some way.
Do you guys have provincial tax in Alberta? Or
Yes.
you, okay. But I suspect that we wouldn't be wrong to say that we're by far the highest tax rate in Canada when you combine provincial and federal, right? In Quebec?
I'm sure Quebec,
Yeah.
because they're so socialist, and because they have they don't they don't really have a lot of industry, do they?
Well, we have a good gaming industry. Oh, I'm looking at the time. Maybe not that there's an expression in Arabic that says it is impossible to be satiated of you. Whenever you're about to leave somebody, in Arabic you say "mabin shaba' minnik." That means it's impossible. It's a polite way of saying that I will
I
have
gotta get the fuck out of here.
soon.
And I,
Although
I won't be able to repeat what you said in Arabic because I can't even do Danish or German properly. So
somebody wrote to me actually on Twitter. I had mentioned another Arabic word. I was having a chat with Sarah Haider, who was a ex-Muslim critic.
yes, I watched. Yeah.
Oh, did you watch it? Okay. And at one point, I mentioned a word, "wahane," which basically means kind of this grand chutzpah, this grand. And somebody writes to me on Twitter, "What is that word that you said?" I said, "Well, how could I? I mean, if I wrote it to you in Arabic, you're not going to understand it. I mean, what do you want me to do? The kind of the transliteral?" So people ask you all sorts of, and if you don't respond, or if you don't respond in the way they want you to, it's as if they genuinely own you, right? You belong to them. And if you don't respond in exactly the way and time that they ask you to, sometimes they will insult you.
You know what I have found nips that in the bud?
Yes,
Okay.
don't
Number
respond
one,
ever.
I tell people straight out, periodically in videos that yes, I appreciate your emails, I appreciate this, that, and the other. I read them all, but I just don't have time to respond to them all. I would need a team of 12 people to respond to every email, working all full time. And number two, after the first few days a video is up, I don't generally go back and read the comments. I just, because if I had to monitor all the comments on my channel, that would be another team of 12 people working full time. Right. And so you're just going to have to, if I don't respond, don't take it personally. Sometimes I get into very lengthy email exchanges with total strangers. And that's because they've asked me a question that I haven't considered before.
Right.
Right. But if you're just telling me, you're grateful, or, or you're just telling me something that I've already dealt with or talked about somewhere, yeah, don't expect a response. It's just not going to happen. And I've found, and go ahead and be mad. I don't care. And that seems to work. So
Right. Yeah, I think I might have to heed that advice, because I always try to be nice and try to answer as many people as possible. But then I find that most of them are very nice, but the ones who are not, boy, they suck you dry. I mean, it's unbelievable.
oh yeah, no, they can take up a lot of your time.
Can we mention some of the social portals and stuff? Do you want to do that?
Oh yeah. Okay, so I'm just trying to figure out where the hell I have them listed. I have them in the low bar of this live stream.
Ah,
But
great. Okay.
yeah, you go ahead and recite them, because I don't have the page up at
So
the
they can
moment.
go to my YouTube channel, which basically whatever, youtube.com/GadSaad. It's basically the sad truth clips. I just set up a Patreon account. It takes a lot of effort to make those, in terms of time, those videos. So if you can support it, that'd be great. They could follow me on Twitter at Gad, GADSAAD. And I also have a public Facebook page, which is Facebook whatever it is, Dr. Gad. Please don't send me to my personal Facebook page. I don't really accept people into that one.
I'm totally gonna harass your wife now. Oh, now that I know that you have a profile on Facebook, I'm gonna find out who she is, and I'm gonna tell her, are you aware that you're married to a misogynist? And he's very beardy, and that, I feel like that's threatening to me.
Got you. That was fantastic. I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, this was fun, and I would love to do this again sometime.
That would be great. I'd love to. That'd be anytime. I'd be happy to. Have a great weekend.
Right. You too.
And we'll talk soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.